right, we are live, slightly late, as many of you have pointed out, and I'll read a couple of those comments here in a second. But for now, welcome back to Reason Answers.
Is as good as waging war against Allah and His Messenger.
Today, we're going to be looking at a video that's not strictly speaking a dawah video. It's not put out by a channel that normally has dawah type content. It's put out by a channel called Arabic 101. Based on the name of the channel alone, you can probably guess that the primary purpose of the channel is to teach Arabic to people interested in learning it. You know, those 85 to 90% of Muslims who have no idea what Islam teaches, since apparently you have to know Arabic in order to know anything about Islam. That is their target audience. However, this video popped up in my feed and has an extremely large number of views for the channel, about 350,000 in the last month, popped up in my feed because, well, YouTube was recommending it broadly. Apparently, there was a very strong audience reaction to this video. The video is the one Hebrew word that proves the Quran is from Allah. I have not watched the video. This will be a live reaction by me. Mary, of course, even though it's a reaction video, spent some time putting together some slides. So you'll get some nice academic thoughts from her and some off the cuff reactions from me. Should be a very interesting video. I'm sure that we'll all convert to Islam by the end of the evening, because after all, this is not dawah. This is just a academic Arabic channel telling us how Arabic works, right? I don't know the exact argument. I can guess based on the thumbnail and the first couple seconds of the video that I inadvertently watched that they're going to make some sort of argument about the meaning of the Hebrew names being conveyed in the Quran, which on the surface seems like a pretty ridiculous proof that something's from God. But you know, I will wait. I will wait and see what they actually have to say. Before I take a couple comments from the audience, Mary, what are your opening thoughts here?
This is one of the funnier ones that I've watched in a while. It's trying very, very hard to be serious and academic, but it is in fact not.
All right. With that preview in mind, right? Mary's watched it. I have not. We'll see. We'll see. Cody says Thaddeus needs an IT guy. No, he just needs to be on time. I didn't have too much problem getting things set up or anything. It was a dinner issue. Dinner took a long time, and I was running late. But Snoopy says, I guess that is looking for a wall plug to plug the computer in. Very funny, very funny. And he also called me the Christian AP. Well, as we all know, it's always the atheists or agnostics' fault that we're late. So I'm sure that it's AP's fault that we're late today. And Mary said she was going to throw me under the bus because she was here on time and I was not. And that is totally probably true. I got here about 2 till, and it takes 10 minutes or so to get everything set up, and she was already here at that time, so she was probably here early, like she says. And he said promises, promises for us going live at a particular time. And then, somewhat unrelated, Professor Yoffel says, haha, the best thing about being an academic is being able to blame your doziness on that. And then a super chat from Jack Gray.
Brothers and sisters, why to lose this great opportunity? Remember, when the person is on his deathbed, the last minute, he will ask Allah Jalla wa ala to be delayed for 1 second to do what? Not to pray, not to do other things, but to give sadaqah, because sadaqah you can give it just like this, in 1 second.
It's TikTok time to rock, and indeed it's time to do something. We'll see what that is when we get into the video, whether it's time to laugh or time to be amazed. We will see. We will see. And Yusuf says, blessings to you, Mary and Thaddeus, and those who are watching. Appreciate that. At least someone wasn't making fun of me for being late. All right, without further ado, I guess we can jump right into the start of the video. Again, the Hebrew word that proved that the Quran is from Allah. I'm going to play the whole video, not all at once, but we will play through the whole thing. We won't like leave out parts we can't respond to or something along those lines. So here we go.
Usain Bolt is a well-known Jamaican sprinter. The funny thing about his name is that it is Bolt, while he is or used to be the fastest man on earth. So his name is actually referring to his amazing ability. Just like the English poet William Wordsworth, his name is a reflection of what he does.
Okay, so
Oh, let's just
they've kind of already
finish this
refuted.
section. Finish
Oh,
this
there's more
section until
more
he finishes
examples.
talking about it. It gets
We call
funnier.
that in English an aptronym. And it is something that you can only understand and be able to make such references if you do understand English and know the meaning of the words Bolt and Wordsworth. Otherwise, you can't refer to this linguistic subtlety, or when heard, it will go right over your head.
All right, so they've already undermined whatever their argument is because there's no meaning behind the fact that Usain Bolt coincidentally has the name Bolt or Williams Wordsworth coincidentally has the name Wordsworth. Many people have either of those last names and they aren't exceptional sprinters or exceptional authors. So, and you don't need to understand English to know that, right? You don't need to understand that not everyone who has the last name Bolt is an exceptional sprinter. So they've already raised the possibility that this can be mere coincidence, unless they're going to argue that this holds for every single individual, that their name reflects who they are, which I know there's probably many people watching whose last name is Smith. I guess you're all very good at working with metal because that is where the name originally derives from. Actually, not coincidental in this case, right? People got the name Smith because they were working with metal originally. And then in the with lots of immigrants coming to the United States, a lot of people were just assigned that name because the immigration workers wanted to Americanize or English their
Just
names.
so you know, that is in fact a myth. The people who chose to anglicize their names usually did so after they came through Ellis Island. They tried their best to spell them according to what they heard, but if you're illiterate and can't spell, and if your country does not have a representative translator, which different associations did provide sometimes, they made their best guess. So they were not trying to anglicize anything. That's a common myth, just so you know.
Yeah, well, okay, so I should have said that the immigrants themselves tried to Anglicize their names. But anyway, because I actually did know that was a myth, and I said it anyway, so shame on me. Um, but my point being that lots of people watching this, or at least lots of people who watched this original video that has 350,000 views, certainly have the last name of Smith. And they're not all metal workers. Not everyone with Bolt is a sprinter, and not everyone with Wordsworth is an author. So names can be coincidental. They've already undermined their argument even before they make their argument.
Well, here's the thing. That is not going to be their argument exactly. Their actual arguments has literally nothing to do with aptronyms. Aptronym is just a word that very few people have heard of. So it makes you sound smart whenever you say it. And then they're going to go off in left field and talk about things totally unrelated to this. So if you can share mine, I want to make fun of them for a second
Yep,
because
yep,
of what they're
can
doing
do,
right
can do.
now. It's hilarious. So this is about totally real linguistic miracles of the Quran, guys. You got to believe me, it's totally real and legitimate. And so the author of this begins to sound smart by referring to an afterman. He's like, oh, this is a special word that most people don't know, that have never heard before. They don't know the meaning of. But an aptronym is something that is a name, nim, that is very apt or appropriate. A person's name that is regarded as usually amusingly particularly appropriate to their occupation, but also possibly in other ways to their general situation. The word patronym, father name, that is in itself a joke. So it's not a patronym, it's not a name from your father, it's an aptronym, ha ha, very funny. So the word is a joke, referring to a name that is particularly apt and
So,
therefore usually funny. Now, the one that they're going to run to is Zechariah. Zechariah is has a common theophoric. It's a common theophoric name. Lots of people have this name. Whoops, I'm echoing a lot.
Yep.
And
Sorry,
it's
that was my
not
bad.
amusing. It does not relate, especially to being a prophet or having anything else, especially to do with one of his traits. It's not an acronym. It's not. What he actually means is that there will be puns, but he's afraid that that won't sound fancified, dignified, smart enough. So it is not in any way an acronym like reference. It would be a it would be a pun. So I will pull up. Whoops. I will pull up the acronym in just 1 second on Wikipedia. I don't know what will happen if I click on that. So and there's some. So you can see what an acronym is um, through these examples. Here we go. I don't need to try dark mode
But
today.
while Mary's going to pull that up, let me just read this real quick. Professor Yoffel says, coincidentally, reasoned answers gives us reasoned answers. What is the chance of that? Indeed, what are the chances? It's a linguistic miracle, guys. This name was chosen totally by chance. So if you speak Hebrew, or at least know a tiny bit of Hebrew, you may have guessed from the thumbnail, which is apparently not the main argument, because I haven't actually watched the video. Mary has. She says the main argument, Zechariah. But you might have guessed that they're going to refer to Isaac and the name meaning laugh. But all you'd have to do is read the biblical story to know that. You wouldn't have to even know Hebrew to include the detail of laughing, and yet somehow they're going to suggest this means it must be from God. It couldn't be from a Hebrew speaker or anyone familiar with the biblical story. It must be from God. That's the only way that it could have the idea of laughing in the Quranic story.
Yep. And then there are, and here's some examples. Jules Angst, he's a Swiss professor of psychiatry who published in Anxiety, Angst, haha. Lance Bass from NSYNC, Lane Beachley, a world champion surfer, uh, Ian Bishop, Church of England bishop, Burt Beveridge, the founder of Tito's Vodka, Doug Bowser, president of Nintendo of America, which has always amused me since Bowser is the bad guy in Super Mario Brothers. Russell Brain, first Baron Brain, a neurologist, and go on, going on with similar things. This is what an acronym is. Does this have anything to do with the name of Zechariah? Is the first one he's going to go to. He'll talk about Isaac too, but he never brings up acronym again. It has nothing to do with any of the biblical names. Like literally nothing. They have to be coincidental and funny. I like this one. John Minor Wisdom, American judge. I like the Minor Wisdom. Just killed me.
I think he should be a politician if he has minor wisdom, but
Yeah.
that's not here.
But and then there's inaptonyms, which gives you like Dr. Payne, the dentist, and so on. Uh, Rob
Bob
Banks,
Banks.
British police officer. Frank Beard, an American musician who was the only, until 2013, was the only member of ZZ Top without a beard. Don Black, white supremacist. Peter Bowler, cricketer, who was a batsman, not a bowler. Samuel Foote, he lost a leg in a horse riding accident. Claudio Gentile, and he was known for his strength, etc., etc. So, Colleen Lawless, American lawyer and judge. Danielle Outlaw, police commissioner. Jaime, or Jamie or Jaime, I'm not sure. Sin, a Catholic prelate, and he became a cardinal, and he became Cardinal Sin. And Bob Walk, the baseball pitcher. So you can see what you should expect if this is going to be an acronym. And I want to point out that this is the level of argumentation throughout this. You're going to sound fancy. You're going to try to sound smarter than other people. Like, oh, I have this secret. I have this fancy word. And because I have this word, you're going to be distracted and not realize that I'm saying completely idiotic things.
Cheeky Shaky says, when I did my butcher's apprenticeship, the teacher's name was G. Porterhouse. Yep, lots of examples.
That's good.
So, I mean, yes, this happens, right? And their examples here are obviously coincidental, right? It's not like Bolt has the last name of Bolt because he is an exceptional sprinter.
But that's why it's funny. Like,
But so in literature, right? So in the real world, it's going to have to be coincidence unless you adopt the name later in life, right? If you're born with the name, then it's going to have to be coincidence. But if you adopt it later in life, then sure, you could do it intentionally. In literature, however, an author could intentionally do this, and they could do so, and it would show some degree of intelligence and some degree of creativity. Same with puns, right? Mary says it's actually about puns. Well, that would show some degree of intelligence, but human beings can come up with puns. So how exactly does this prove it's from God?
well,
I don't know.
keep
But
going.
I haven't
Keep
seen yet.
watching this
I
movie
haven't
or
seen
his
yet. So we will
little
see how this
video.
proves it is from God. All right, let's go ahead and get this up here. So almost a minute into the 9-minute video, and so far they've just made a totally pointless point.
But what does any of this have to do with the Quran?
Yes, tell me.
Well, one of the biggest claims against the Quran is that it was authored by Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, since he was the one dictating his companions. But surprisingly, the Quran contains some
He
subtle
dictated his
clues and
companions.
acronym-like references to
Sorry.
other languages that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, could not have possibly known himself, proving in an interesting way the divinity of this book. And
All right. So at least so far, they are going to try to make the argument that, oh, Muhammad couldn't have known the meaning of the Hebrew words, and yet the story reflects the meaning of the Hebrew word. Yeah, but all I'd have to do is know the biblical story to get the pun or to accidentally do it. Plus,
Yep.
whoever his source is may have well known Hebrew, right? Uh, just because Muhammad dictated it, if he did, doesn't mean that no one knew what it meant in Hebrew or
But
knew what it meant in Greek or knew what it meant in Syriac or any other language. I mean, this argument is
yep.
idiotic. Idiotic. I haven't even seen their examples, and Mary assures me that their examples are terrible. But if they had the best examples in the world, the argument would mean nothing. Nothing. Proof, everyone, proof.
emphasizing the linguistic marvel of the Quran. To understand more what I mean, let's look at this first example. At the beginning of Surah Maryam, Allah mentions Prophet Zakaria, but notice the choice of words when Allah first talks about him in the second ayah. ذكر رحمة ربك عبده زكريا. The name Zakaria is originally a Hebrew name, which literally means the mention of God or the mention of the Lord. And notice how the ayah starts in Arabic. ذكر رحمة ربك, which provides an incredible reference to the meaning of the name Zakaria in Hebrew. But
Okay, I gotta stop it there. Mention really?
Yeah, keep going, keep going. I know it's really stupid. I the fact that he went with the translation mention, I helped him out to make his point less stupid because it's so stupid. But yeah, let's get all the way
Okay, but
through.
just give me a second. I'll wait to say why this argument is refutes itself after we get through at least one example. But I just cracking up at this being the example.
delivering it in Arabic, producing a satisfying symmetry to the ayah. A mention of the mercy of your Lord to his servant Zechariah, the mention of the Lord. If you think this is far-fetched or a bit too constrained, let us check another example.
Okay,
This ayah
just
speaks
stop
of
here.
Oh,
Ibrahim's
stop
wife.
here.
That,
So
that,
so
that's the first
example
one.
one is that's the entirety of it, I guess, in their first example. Yes.
Yes, that is it. So,
All
so
right.
this is the word dhikr that I kept talking about how important dhikr theology was. Remembrance theology, remember, remember, remember. He decided to go with mention. I don't know why. The
Well, I
reminder
know
slash
why.
remembrance theology, because the standard translation chooses to make it mention. Because the idea of remembrance in the Semitic languages can involve something mental, but it can also involve the literal saying of things aloud. Both of these things fall under remembering, and actions fall under remembering too. It's a more active way of looking at the word remembering. It's not merely contemplative. And so I'm going to translate it as a reminder to make this less stupid, because he
But it won't
wants
be
to go with
soon.
mention, and that would be the Lord mentioned as Zechariah's name. His name would
Yeah.
become the Lord mentioned, which is just moronic. So we're going to go with reminder and remember, because that is way less stupid, and understanding the full range of meanings that reminder and remembrance can have. So the root of reminder, of dhikr, is that dal, then kaf, the k, and then the ra. Okay, so it's a the sound, k, um, so, and then the name Zachariah in Arabic, or Zachariah from Arabic, it was originally from Hebrew, and it was not just God remembered, not the Lord remembered. It
Uh-huh.
was Yahweh remembered.
Yeah, you got Yah in there. Uh-huh. That's what I
So,
forgot. I wasn't even thinking about Zechariah being an example of that, but that's what I was going to say about how this argument refutes itself. Because actually, you could say
right,
one word that proves the Quran is not from Allah, because it
right,
contains the divine name in some names, but not others. Right? It doesn't always do that with the biblical names.
yeah. So the assertion is that Allah knows through omniscience, that's the only way to know it, that Zachariah is a Hebrew name meaning God remembered or the Lord remembered, and placed a pun
Except
in the
it's not.
text
It's
as a
Yahweh.
linguistic
Remember?
miracle. That's not what it means. But again, this elegant whatever is supposed to be a reminder of the Rahman of your Lord to a slave the Lord remembered. So it's supposed to be this beautiful parallel that is only there because of the intelligence and insight and the linguistic miracle of the Quran. And I have now improved the argument for him by not translating it stupidly.
Mhm.
So, problem number one, does the Hebrew mean the Lord remembered?
Ooh.
No. So, yeah, my point is just that Rab is Lord. It's generic. Rab in Arabic, and then in Hebrew it's Rab too, but it's like not, doesn't have a shada. Um, But Yahweh is the unique divine name of the God of the Jews. It's not just Lord. So, would it be a linguistic miracle that a book that never knows the God of the Jews is called Yahweh references people with this theophoric name?
Uh-huh.
So, the actual meaning is a reminder of the Rahman of your Lord to a slave, Yahweh remembered. So, who is Yahweh? Does this seem divine to you? Does this book that is talking about a guy named Yahweh remembered but doesn't know that God's name is Yahweh, is that divine?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I'm not actually entirely joking when I say one word that proves the Quran is not from God, because the author of the Quran doesn't seem to know that these names contain the corrupted fake name of God, Yahweh, or whatever a Muslim's going to tell us. Um, but then they don't even always do it, right? Some of the names they just arbitrarily change, or there might be linguistic reasons why it happened. It's probably not an arbitrary choice of the author per se, right? Because they're just using the names that already exist for the most part. But sometimes it contains the Yah, and sometimes it doesn't when it's converting a biblical name. No pattern to it whatsoever. I'd say that's actually pretty strong evidence of what we would say, that someone, whether it's Muhammad or someone else, is repeating biblical stories and passing them off as unique divine revelation and doing a poor job of it for the most part, getting a
yeah.
lot of the stories wrong in the process.
Oh, just for the future, the sound of the clip might be a bit low. We have a
Yeah,
request.
I put up a thing
Okay,
that
cool.
someone said that. I have tried to turn it up. We'll see when I play it again.
All right. So, problem two, is it realistically a pun of some sort? This is not an atronym. It's not atronym like. He looked for something other than pun because pun doesn't sound smart enough. But
which is unfair because actually, puns are seen as kind of the lowest form of humor, but actually they kind of take the most creativity often.
Yes.
It's, subtle wordplay. But for whatever reason, culturally, yes, they're seen as the lowest form of humor. And thus he didn't want to call it that. He didn't want to call the Quran just containing puns.
Yep. So here's the challenge. If this is a common form of expression in the Quran and an established introduction of a section or an idea of the Quran, it is not a pun at all, or even or an established introduction of a section or idea.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
form
That
of
was my other
expression.
thought.
Dhikr is one of the most important ideas of what the Quran considers itself to be. That's why I gave like a 5-minute spiel on it the other day, like a few weeks ago. I talked about how important it is for you guys to understand that the Quran, what we call the Quran, which is a compiled artificial construction of things that Muhammad said according to people who wanted to bury stuff that they really didn't like that he said. Um, but this thing that he was doing, the words that were coming out of his mouth most often were called the reminder. It was called the dhikr. That's what it was called more than anything else. Most common was reminder. Next most common is book, or a revelation from the book, or of the book, or sent down of the book. So a portion of a book. The third most common is Quran, a recitation or declamation. And then the least common is Furqan, which only two things are called, which means salvation and is always mistranslated because Muhammad just copied a word and didn't know what it meant. So Muslims had to make up their own meaning. And Muhammad, his most important or most common job description is being a warner. That is his most common job description. He is a warner. So, would it be weird for things to be talking about reminding people and remembrances and remembering and remind and all this stuff if the most common thing that the Quran and the activity of Muhammad giving these things is called remembrance or reminder? Would that be some sort of sneaky pun there? Or would it be the most common thing that you would expect a section like this to be introduced as if there is a section? So, so here are some examples about some general times where people are told to remember a particular event whenever that
These are
event
all
is being
about
introduced.
Zechariah, right? All these passages are going to be about Zechariah because that is the
Nope, none of
standard that
them.
has been. No, darn it. Darn it. I
Um,
thought that was the standard that's been set up.
So to the Quraysh, Muhammad said, and remember when he made you successors after the people of Noah. And then the part where, and then they ask you about Dhul Qarnayn. Say, I will recite to you what? A reminder about him. Oh, so the section about Dhul Qarnayn is also a reminder, just like the story of Zechariah is a reminder. And we each relate to you from the news of the messengers that by which we make firm in your heart, and there has come to you in this truth of an instruction and a reminder for the believers. And there are tons more times that the Quran is called a reminder that I'm not even beginning to go to. I'm mostly citing here times whenever a section or a historical event or an idea is introduced as a reminder. I'm leaving out, except for that one, all the other times that the Quran is itself being
Mhm.
called a reminder.
Oh,
So
that's because Zechariah is the author of the Quran, and as Hussein Mashni points out, also
there we
the
go.
author of the Torah and the Zabur. So
Yep.
there you go.
They yes, they are all called dhikr.
The-
All the messages from before are called dhikr, and it's often translated as message just to trick you. O children of Israel, remember my favor, which I have bestowed on you, and fulfill my covenant upon you, that I will fulfill your covenant and be afraid of me. So this is a reminder within the reminder of previous events. Remember my favor that I bestowed upon you, and that I preferred you over the sentient beings is actually the correct translation, meaning other humans and jinn. And remember the favor of Allah upon you and his covenant with which he bound you when he said, we hear and obey and fear Allah. Indeed, Allah is knowing of that within the breast. So again, remember what? His covenant with which he bound you and said, we hear and we obey. So notice, by the way, I want you guys to pay attention here. It affirms here that the people said, we hear and obey. We obey. What did the Jews say? Everyone in the chat, together now. We hear and we obey. The Quran affirms that they actually said this. This will be important later.
okay. Good to know.
So, a whole bunch of other times. And remember when he made you successors after the ad and settled you on the land and take for yourselves palaces, blah, blah, blah. Oh, who have believed, remember the favor of Allah upon you. When a people determined to extend their hands in aggression against you, he withheld their hands from you. And then on that day, Allah will go, "Oh, Isa, son of Mary, remember my favor upon you and upon your mother when I supported you with a pure spirit and you spoke to the people in the cradle and maturity." So again, remember this event. Remember this thing that happened. Remember a historical time. When Moses said to his people, "Remember the favor of Allah upon you when he saved you from the people of Pharaoh," etc., etc. Remember when you were few and he increased you, and how was the end of the corruptors? And remember, be patient over what they say, and remember our servant David, the possessor of strength. So here's someone else. We've had Dul Qarnain, we've had Moses telling the people, the children of Israel, to remember, and now we have David. And remember our servant Job when he called his Lord. And remember our servants Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And remember Ishmael, Elisha, and Dhul Kifl, and they are among the outstanding. So here are a
So
whole bunch of
basically,
people. It looks
yeah.
very similar, doesn't it? And
Yeah, just
remember
remember all the people.
servant.
Remember all the people that came before. And this obviously was only some kind of creative pun or acronym, which it isn't, when it applies to Zechariah, which means it's obviously coincidental, right? I'm going to say probably, I haven't watched the video again, but I'm probably going to say that, yes, some of these are actually puns, but this one is clearly coincidence because it says this about everyone. Everyone is told, remember everyone, not just Zechariah.
Oh,
And
but
this
it
is our
gets
lead
better.
example.
Remember,
Lead
this was from
example.
Surah 19:2. So, a reminder of the Rahman of your Lord to his slave Zechariah. Oh, look at this. The rest of Surah 19 has a whole bunch of these same structures. And remember in the book Mary when she withdrew, blah blah blah. And remember in the book Abraham, indeed, blah 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 blah. And remember in the book Moses, indeed, blah blah blah. And remember in the book Moses again. Oh wait, there was supposed to be a different one there. Dang, I copied one. I forgot who the extra guy was.
Shame on
And
you. Your
shame
argument
on
has
me.
been refuted, Mary.
Yeah, there we go. I accidentally doubled one. So because we only have one, two, three, four other ones listed from the exact same surah and very similar formats, then it can't be true. And remember, in the book Idris, indeed, he was a man of truth and a prophet. So this is like a totally normal thing that is said about tons of different prophets and tons of different events and historical folks that you're being called to remember.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the primary purpose of the Quran. If we're just going based on the Quran, not based on Islamic tradition, the primary purpose seems to be to remind people of stories they already know. And yet the argument here is that it's miraculous that the author is aware of these stories or aware of some subtle linguistic aspects of these stories.
Oh, and
Um,
Snoopy,
okay.
oh, Snoopy pointed out that there is no Book of Mary. This is supposed to be, by this time, Muhammad had made up his theology of an eternal heavenly book, of which all other books are excerpts. So the Quran only has things that are revealed from this book. It's not the same thing as the book, and that's the same as all the rest of them.
What?
Idris is supposed to be Enoch, but that is a later association. No one knows.
We have a couple Muslims in the chat. We got Ayub saying something totally unrelated. And then we got Nur with such genius comments as this. What do you mean asserting? I don't get you. The unknown author of Quran is intentionally telling the meaning of names of prophets through their stories in Quran. I'll give you an example if you want to. So this is in response to me asking Nur to interact with the video. And this is what they said. what Arabic 101 says supports the idea of description of things, including names of people, are so subtle and intricate to the Quran.
This proves that it's not subtle and intricate. It proves that this is a
Exactly.
form that is used
Interact
for
with
everyone.
our response to the video. Don't just repeat what the video says. Just repeating what the video says is an assertion. You have to interact with the response to it in order to actually interact with us. Just asserting
Right.
something doesn't make it true. The author of the Arabic 101 video asserted that there's something special about the name of Zechariah. Mary has shown numerous data points that show that's not the case, that the Quran makes the exact same statement about all these other people. So why is it somehow something special about knowing the name Zechariah and not a coincidence?
Yeah. It's completely a coincidence. But
Plus, you
again,
need to interact with the fact that the name Zechariah contains the divine name,
oh, but it gets
Yahweh,
better.
that the Quran doesn't know.
It gets better here.
But wait,
So,
there's more.
yes, the third problem is would it, if it is a pun, which we've already shown conclusively that it's no way it's a pun. This is just a common form that is used for tons and tons of people. It's not a pun, it's not clever. And Arabic Pod 101 or remedial Arabic Pod here does knows that he's making a terrible argument because whenever it is an unusual word, he will say so. He will say it's an unusual word, but he knows it's not unusual. He knows that this appears again and again and again. But if you were trying to make a pun with it, would it be a pun that only Allah knows? So it's asserted that Muhammad could not possibly know enough to make this pun. That is what he says, and those words could not possibly know enough. But remember, should be a really obvious pun to lots of people. The Northwest Semitic languages, they lost the sound dal, and it collapsed into the Z sound, the zain. So there's only a Z. So if you saw a Z in a language that was Northwest Semitic, if as a speaker of Arabic, you would know that that could either be a true Z or a the sound in your own language, and that either one is quite possible. And so anyone who knew Arabic and knew that Zachariah is a Hebrew word would have realized that it is from that root. They would know what root it's from. They would know that it's from the root of remembrance. And an example is that a Latin, if you talked about to a Spanish speaker and an Italian speaker about words that are common to the two because they both came from Latin, they have cognates with one another. And the Latin febre, it became Spanish fiebre and Italian febre. So, and that is a predictable pattern in Spanish and Italian. So, a Spanish speaker, without even knowing the Italian word febre, who was familiar with Italian generally, would know that fiebre would have to become febre. You would have to have that gemination, or in Arabic you call it the shada. Obviously, you call it only gemination in Italian. The shada is an Arabic word. Similarly, CL, FL, and PL in Latin became the y sound, like llave, llave in Spanish, but it became chiave in uh, in uh, in Italian. Same thing with uh, flamma became llama or fiamma. And anybody who is a Spanish speaker who has just acquaintance with Italian, it's not like you have to know the fancy words. Human beings recognize patterns between languages. And you would realize that you'd go from uh, that fiamma uh, would become llama in Spanish. Now, the other way around, you wouldn't know whether or not it was KIPI or FI sound, but you'd know that it would be one of those. So this is also something like you don't have to be a British person to speak in a fake British accent that gets some of the sounds right because you recognize patterns of differences. So anyone who knows a little Arabic and a little Aramaic, or who speaks Arabic natively, and a little Aramaic or Hebrew, they would know that that Z could be a the or a z, and they would make the comparison, figure out which one it is. For example, the difference between Hajj and Hug, and um, Paro and, well, actually, it goes through a bunch of different changes, but F and P, I was going to choose one that was borrowed from Greek, and so it was much more confusing. But um, paradise, as it comes to us through the Greek, becomes an firdaus in Arabic, even though it's originally a Persian word, but you know what it is because the P's become F's whenever you go into classical Arabic. Now, do keep in mind that there were Arabic dialects that had the hard G and still do, and there were ones that had the P. I don't know whether or not there is any now. Maybe not. I'm not sure. I actually don't know. But that these are systematic changes that people be familiar with. So if it was a pun, which is a terrible pun, then a human being could see it. A human being could do it. But I don't think it is. I think it's just the pattern that it's been.
Yeah, I think in this case, it's just a coincidence. But if it was an intentional pun or whatever you want to call it, that's just something a human author could do. So Nur has attempted to respond after me telling them 4 times to stop just repeating the argument and actually respond. So Yahweh, the God, remembers? Seriously? Is that what you're saying? You're making it worse. The meaning you're making it is absurd, meaningless. This is what I'm talking about. God remembers.
She is very stupid. No
So,
one doubts that it means Yahweh remembers. Arabic
yeah.
pod is just trying to hide it, and it's supposed to make it God
So yes.
mentioning, which is
So it
particularly
says
stupid.
the generic Lord, right? In Arabic, the generic Lord remembers or reminds or whatever you want to say you about Zechariah, which if you take the Hebrew meaning is Yahweh remembers.
And what that means that Yahweh remembers, that would most often be a name given to a son who was born when there hadn't been a son yet, or not a son who survived, or
Yeah,
you're
like
having fertility
infertility type
problems and you
issues,
finally get your
right?
son. And
Yep.
there's a saying that God has remembered me, meaning that God has done an action on my behalf. Because as I said, the Semitic range of the word remember is far more than contemplation. It involves activity, and just like the word know has a very different range of meaning that's far more active and means that you've done an action of something. So whenever it says, like, remember the name of your Lord in the Quran, that's understood to mean that you're supposed to be saying it aloud. You're supposed to be taking an activity with that action aloud. And Rob Banks for the answer for that. He was a British police officer, which is excellent.
Uh-huh. Stop. Put that up there since it was asked. If you don't understand, rewind the video. All right. So we got, let me just try to break down this argument, okay? So the Quran says to remember. This is the reminder or remembrance or whatever of Prophet X. I don't know, a dozen times, 2 dozen times. It says this is a reminder, remembrance of various historical events, another dozen times. None of these have anything to do with the names in those passages. But supposedly, when it comes to Zechariah, this is some kind of miracle. Not that Zechariah is actually a prophet, but the Quran thinks he is. So this is some kind of miracle that the author of the Quran proves itself to be God because it uses the exact same phrase to describe 30 people, and one of them, if you look at the Hebrew, contains the divine name of Yahweh, which the Quran is unaware of. Okay, great argument, Arabic 101. Let's all convert to Islam. We already explained to you, Nura, what Yahweh remembers would mean and why it would be used as a name. How about you interact with the ridiculous idea that you're taking Yahweh, putting it as the Lord, which is not what it means, right? It's a divine name. People use the Lord out of respect rather than the divine name, but it doesn't mean the Lord, right? There's Hebrew words that mean the Lord, Adonai, that somehow the author of the Quran knew the divine name, knew that people used it as Lord, and intentionally put this in the passage, even though the Quran never once uses the name Yahweh.
Yep. All right, let's just jump to the next one because I think that she's just trying to distract now. I don't think that a human being can actually be this stupid. So let's.
yeah. So maybe the next example's better. Maybe the next example is better. Couldn't be worse. I mean, in fairness, I don't see how it could possibly be worse than that one, since that was neither an acronym, nor a pun, nor remarkable in any way, and revealed what's reality going on is that the author of the Quran is repeating stories without knowing the subtle meanings of names or any other of the subtle details of these stories. I'm sure that some of their examples are going to include subtle details from these stories, but all you'd have to know is the story to know that. You wouldn't have to know Hebrew, nor it would be impossible for someone who's feeding Muhammad information to know Hebrew. So this is the most ridiculous proof of the Quran I have ever heard. Well, maybe not, because all of the proofs are so ridiculous.
Here comes the one you were waiting for next. So.
Okay, but before we do that, I did want to address this from Chris. He says, "Moo ham head." Indeed, this is a linguistic miracle. Muhammad's head was filled with meat. He had no actual brain. It's contained right in his name. That's the level of argument going on here, so why not? Why not? All right, let's get example number 2. And let me know if this sounds better this time, guys.
When she received the news of having Ishaq. But take a good look at the choice of words here. وَامْرَأَتُهُ قَائِمَةٌ فَضَحِكَتْ. The word ضحكت means laughed. Do you know how many times this word was used in the Quran? Well,
no,
it was chosen to be used in the Quran only once, in this very ayah, when she received the news of having Ishaq. Now, the name Ishaq in Hebrew is...
Hey, just a reminder, how many times was the remembers used in the Quran or mentioned as
way more than 100. Way more than 100.
So this isn't a pattern. You can't just take the unique word and apply it. Oh, darn it.
But you see, now that there actually is a unique word, he is like going to make a deal out of it.
And
but the
actually,
fact
he's
that it
not
was
wrong.
totally ordinary and repeated like way more than 100 times, that remembrance in its various forms as a verb or a noun or whatever was used with regard to what Muhammad was doing. Way more than 100 times. But he's still going to pretend that this was a miracle
this
before.
is an equivalent example to the first. But he's not wrong that a unique word could be meaningful. It could just be because there's no other reason to mention
But
laughing
it
in the
is
entire
meaningful here.
But it
Why
is
do you
meaningful
think it has
because he's copied from the Hebrew story.
Oh, here we go. He's copying from an existing Hebrew story. Now, where? So yeah, he's copying
And
from a very
actually,
well-known Hebrew
sorry, Mary,
story.
just one second. And actually, just so the audience knows, this is actually a marker that people who analyze text will look for sometimes. This unique word, right? They'll look for this special word, and they'll say, "Oh, this is a good clue of where this was borrowed from, because this word doesn't occur anywhere else, and it occurs in these two texts in the same context." So it's not definitive, but it is a clue. So ironically, right, the author of this video is actually right that this word is significant, but not for the purposes that he thinks.
And that is exactly right.
So should I play a little bit more to finish this, or are we?
Oh yeah, finish this argument off because it's hilarious.
Yitzhak. which literally means to laugh. And it gets even better. The rest of the ayah. وَمِن وَرَاءِ إِسْحَاقَ يَعْقُوبَ. So Allah specifically used وَمِن وَرَاء, and after Ishaq, Yaqub. Can you guess what the name Yaqub means in Hebrew? Well, it means the one who comes after.
No, it
So
doesn't.
with each name, there is that subtle reference in its Hebraic origin, showing that the one who wrote this must know Hebrew. Otherwise, these references would have been impossible to come up.
No, they would not be impossible without knowing Hebrew. All you'd have to know is the story. If the
Yes.
biblical story did not have a reason why Isaac was named she laughed, or he laughed, whatever, then yes, that would be quite odd. But the story tells you exactly why Isaac is named that way.
Yep, and I have this here. So let's start with this. And
All
his
you'd have
wife
to
was
know is the
standing.
freaking story, not Hebrew.
Yep. And his wife was standing, so she laughed. So we gave her the glad tidings of Isaac, and after Isaac, Jacob. Now I want to ask you a question here. If she's getting the glad tidings of Jacob, what does that mean? It means who is she the mother of here? She, she's the
What do you
mother
mean?
of both Ishaq and
Yeah,
Jacob.
it seems
Yeah.
to suggest that she's the mother of Jacob. Yes.
Yeah, it's corrected later on in the Quran where it's explicitly like, oh, really, Yaqub is the son of Ishaq, but it is retconned in because Muhammad consistently had Ishaq followed by a younger brother Yaqub and
Yeah, and
multiple points.
Phil apparently also saw that. It didn't occur to me immediately, but yeah, that would be the natural reading of the text, right? So she
Yeah, there
had
there are
Isaac,
many of
gave
these.
birth to Isaac, and then after that gave birth to Jacob. That would be the natural reading of the text, as it is, which is interesting because well, it doesn't match the Bible. I guess the Muslim could try to claim, although they don't, but they could try to claim that the Bible is wrong on that detail, as Mary
No,
pointed
because
out.
Muhammad retconned anything when he
Right,
got to
he
an
he
error,
tried
he
to fix it
retconned it.
later.
Right. So he consistently calls Isaac and Jacob brothers for quite a while, and then he retcons in that, oh, that actually means grandchild. Of course, Sarah was not alive when Jacob was born. She wasn't alive when Isaac married. So, why she would be getting good news of a child she would never see seems very odd. But somehow she is this person's mother here. But anyway, from the actual Bible, we find out about Sarah laughing in two different places. So the men at the oaks of Mamre say to Abraham, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "She's in the tent." The Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." This is God appearing as a man. And Sarah was listening at the door behind him. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "Am I worn out, and my Lord is old? Shall After I am worn out, and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a son now that I'm old?'" See, she's standing. They don't even know where she's standing here. Standing at the tent door behind him is where she actually was. Um, and is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, "I did not laugh, for she was afraid." He said, "No, but you did laugh." So here we go. We have the story that was taken from. And then again, whenever
Before you,
Isaac is born, here is
if you
the
could
naming
pause
of it.
there,
Go ahead.
yeah, if you could pause there real quick, because I want to get this from Nur before we move on, since it was about the previous section. It's embarrassing, you Christians. I need to go waste of time. I don't know what you want to beat around the bush. Just say Zechariah means a remembrance or awareness of true reality. You're the
It
one who
doesn't.
said that it meant remembrance of the Lord. That was the whole argument. Now you're trying to say it means something different because you don't
Yep.
want it to contain Yahweh. Oh my goodness! You just after saying this was a great example of the linguistic miracle of the Quran. Now you claim the name means something else. This is the level of your stupidity or desperation. Unbelievable.
So
And then
Arabic
she,
pod, just to be clear, Arabic pod knows perfectly well that the first element means remembrance, which he choose. It can also mean saying something aloud in Hebrew too. It just makes no sense in this context. So it could mean mention. He's just choosing to butcher it, and he doesn't
yeah,
mind
well,
that
I mean, I don't care
it
about
sounds
the
really dumb.
mention
That's
versus
fine.
remembrance,
But
right? I
he
mean,
knows that the second part is the name of God. He just chooses to translate it as God, Lord,
uh-huh.
instead of giving the actual name. It's a name. It's a name. It's like
And not only that,
Bob,
Nur
and
does
he
that
says
too, because Nur
man.
made the argument. And then now it's taking it back. And
And
then
now
she
she's
made
taking it
some,
back, going, no, no, it doesn't have that part in it. So
yeah,
Arabic
it means
Pod
true
is
reality.
stupid and doesn't know what he's talking about.
So then there's
So
no pun here at all. And there is no linguistic miracle after I said this was a linguistic miracle. Unbelievable. And then she insults me and says, bye bye. Yeah, I would run away too. I would run away too if you were in danger of learning that your idiotic dawah arguments are idiotic and actually usually reveal the exact opposite to be the case, that the Quran is borrowed from the Hebrew Bible, or the stories in it, not directly, right? I'm not suggesting that the author was literally reading the Hebrew and literally trying to translate it into Arabic. That would not be an accurate picture of what happened. But they heard the stories and intentionally or unintentionally passed them off as their own personal revelation. All Nur can do is insult me because she has no actual argument or actual response to anything we said other than to undermine her own claim by making up a ridiculous nonsense definition for Zechariah. All right. All right. This is the level of argument that we are facing today. All right, Mary, let's get back to Isaac.
all right, so the next bit. So the Lord visited Sarah. So this is after, whenever she has the baby. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of the son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in this old age. So, laughter is said together with Isaac here. So again, the phonetic differences between laughter in the Hebrew and Arabic would be able to be figured out by a native speaker, but there are two processes that separate ishaq from the hikat. So the t of yitzhak in the Hebrew, it diverged from the dad, the D sound of the Arabic for laugh. So there's a D dad in the Arabic, and there's a ts kind of sound in the uh, in the Hebrew, and it was the same phoneme, but they grew apart and had different sounds. Then, in borrowing the name Itzhak back to Arabic, instead of, that should just be one I, um, id idhak, which would have kept the pun, it becomes ishak. So the ts turns to s when it's borrowed back again. So now there's only one letter in common in the root. So in Arabic, it's a completely failed pun. It doesn't work. Now, the argument is that this is a super subtle, clever thing that Allah specially did, showing how divine and intelligent he was by saying laughter, knowing that Ishaq's name in Hebrew means laughter, which no one would ever possibly know.
Yep,
but it would
that
be a
is the argument.
completely failed pun in Hebrew or in Arabic, but it was a pun in the Hebrew. His name did come from laughter in the Hebrew, and it's mentioned in the story in multiple places. And guess what? That's why he's named Isaac. That's why he has that name, because of the
Uh-huh.
laughter.
Yep.
It's a very common story. It's like saying, why only Allah would know the story of Job has to do with him getting swallowed by a large marine creature. That is the level of argumentation. That is the story of Isaac's birth, that his mother laughed, and so he was named Laughter. That's the story. She's old, she laughed, he was named Laughter. That's it. Those are the points that anyone who knows the story would remember. So while you could figure it out, it's not really a pun anymore. What is it? It's copying the Bible. That's it. It's copying the Bible. All it's showing,
Hmm.
and it's copying the Bible without any idea whatsoever that it understands the pun. Like there's no reference to it. There's no, and that is why he is named. So even that appears to have been lost in this telling, because you could reason it out, but it doesn't work as a pun anymore. I mean, that's why we have footnotes in the English. Isaac means laughter. Like we have these footnotes. Why?
Hmm.
That little A right there is is a footnote to let us know that we should look at that and go, hey, there's going to be, that means laughter. That's what all of this means. But you don't get that glossing in the Arabic, so it becomes this
Well, if you
weird
did get
dead
it
element.
right, if you did get it in the Arabic, then they couldn't possibly claim it was a miracle, right? Because it would be readily apparent to everyone who speaks Arabic. So they actually need it not to work in Arabic to even begin to have an argument. But notice here, right? Because the Arabic is supposedly the original genuine version, according to Islamic theology. And the Hebrew Bible is supposed to be corrupted. So the genuine doesn't have the pun, the corrupted does, and then this is proof that the original is divine. That's the argument that this channel is making
Yeah.
indirectly.
Now, uh, now if we continue on, they made a point about Jacob's name, and they declared that it means
It
uh,
comes after.
comes after. That's what they declared that it means. It has to mean this for their argument to work. It absolutely does not mean this even a little bit. This is about Rachel, who is the actual mother of Jacob, even though the Quran never figures this out. So when her days were to give birth were complete, and behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak, so they called his name Esau. Afterwards, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name is called Jacob. See that little D there? If you went to the footnote says D. Jacob means he takes by the heel or he cheats. Does it mean comes after? No, it does not mean that. So he just lied. And he knows he's a liar. And here is proof here, Strong's Concordance, Jacob. Uh, it it says word origin from the same as akeb. What is akeb? It means heel, footprint, hind part.
So,
So
I want to address this from a somewhat attempt of response from a Muslim here, right? So CK says, are they, meaning you and I guess, really trying to debunk Islam like this? Well, first of all, we're not trying to debunk Islam. That's not the purpose. We're trying to debunk a video claiming this is proof of Islam, right? So actually, we're not trying to disprove Islam. We're trying to debunk the idiotic argument of this video. Now, granted, we have lots and lots and lots of ways we can disprove Islam. Saying that there is nothing special linguistically here does not disprove Islam by itself. So the irony here, right? You accuse me of straw manning. The irony here is you're straw manning me. You're ascribing a position to me that I'm not taking. I am not saying that our response disproves Islam. I am pointing out some problems that this raises for Islam, but the purpose of this video is to respond to the claim that there's a linguistic miracle here. My purpose is to debunk that claim, not to provide proof that Islam is false. In this video, If you want to see proof that Islam is false, look up some of my other videos on the channel. Okay, so that's number one. Now, number two, you say that the argument is literally making assumption that Muhammad saw a copied Bible, just that. Again, what another ridiculous straw man. I specifically said whoever wrote the Quran did not see the Bible or copy the Bible directly. I said they heard stories and repeated details from those stories.
Yep. There's almost
And
no.
it's not just an assumption. We have provided evidence of that. Look at the biblical story that explains in detail why Isaac's name is left, compared to the Quran that just says these words. Which one is more likely to be a remembrance of what people have heard? Oh, wait, the Quran calls itself a reminder or remembrance of what people already know. Oh my gosh.
And what's important is that Muslims get really touchy about the fact that the Quran repeats things from before, but that's supposed to be the proof of the Quran according to itself, that Muhammad is getting this knowledge that Jews and Christians already have, but he could only be getting it from God. So this bit of knowledge here, and his wife was standing, so she laughed, so we gave her glad tidings of Ishaq, and after Ishaq, Yaqub. We are supposed to believe that those details can only come from God, not from the far more likely source that Muhammad heard some stories and he remembered the most salient bits. That his wife was overhearing something and heard something and laughed, and then Isaac came. Like, those are the salient bits that in oral repetition would end up being the things that stuck around.
Yep.
So notice that he just lies, completely
just real
lies.
quick. 1 second, Mary. So Houston says it's obvious that the writer of the Quran didn't read the Old or New Testament, as is obvious from the casual comparison of the story in the Quran compared to the original. Yeah, that's my actual position, that he heard oral stories, which is actually the position of academics as well, for the most part. Even ones that are generous and say that he heard these stories younger in life, didn't remember that he'd heard them and genuinely thought he was receiving revelation when he recalled the details of what he'd heard before. This is what anyone who's looked at the data will say is the most likely scenario, that the author of the Quran, whether that's Muhammad or someone else, whoever wrote the Quran, was somewhat familiar with the biblical stories,
but not very.
Yeah, not completely familiar with them. Certainly wasn't copying the text literally. Had two documents in front of him. One was what he was copying from, and the other was what he was writing. No one would say that who's informed. So actually understand our position and respond to that, not a straw man, which is so ironic since you accused me of straw man.
Keep in mind that the author of the Quran inserted pregnant camels for pregnant women. That's the kind of both knowledge and ignorance of the Bible that was there. That there's familiarity with things, but they're not the primary source. And the very, very few bits that he might have had that was actually biblical text is a small fraction of Isaiah 40. He might have had that in the literal words. Everything else was filtered through hymns at best, and the vast majority of it is this level. Something about wife standing there laughing and then a son, Isaac. Like, that's the level that he had through this Chinese whispers telephone game system that brought him the stories that he put into his book. So, now there is a scholar.
Let me just address this real quick from CK, since he is trying. What proof do you bring forward that he heard them, and why would he specifically, and they accidentally hit enter because they deleted this and they're going to add more, but I wanted to respond to it right away. I don't have to prove that he heard them. I just have to
I can prove that he heard them. By the way, I can prove
that
he
hold on, Mary. Hold on, Mary. Mary, I can provide evidence for that, and Mary will here in a second. But I actually don't have to prove it. I just have to show that it's possible, to show that this is not proof that Islam has to be divine, right? All I have to suggest is that it's a possibility to debunk the claim of the video, which I'm going to put back on the screen here, right? This is their claim. This is what I am debunking. And I don't know why it didn't come up. Yeah, there we go. Their claim, it is impossible to make such references without knowing Hebrew. My purpose is to demonstrate that it is possible to make such reference without knowing Hebrew. I don't have to prove that it actually happened. in the way that I think it did to prove that it's possible. Their argument only works if it's impossible. It's not
Yes.
impossible.
And keep in mind that there is a whole list of slaves who came from Jewish and Christian backgrounds, mostly taken as children, who were in Mecca that Muhammad was accused of listening to. A huge list of them, not one or two, like 8. And he was specifically accused of going to listen to him. His own nurse, Baraka, she was Ethiopian. Was probably taken very young. She's probably 8 or so, but she knew everything that an 8-year-old would have known of her own religion. So, and Muhammad grew up speaking the Ethiopian language that he learned from her because she was the closest that he had to a mother figure, although he probably slept with her because he is the way he is. So we also have our buddy Zayd ibn Harith, whom he adopted. Where's he from? He's from a Christianized tribe of Arabs, and was probably again 8, 10 at the most whenever he was taken captive. He has that knowledge. So in his household, there are a minimum of 2. Um, Abu Rafi was also either Jewish or Christian, and his wife, Rafi or Salma, was supposed to be the midwife to Khadija and Khadija's slave, and Rafi is explicitly mentioned as either Jewish or Christian in background. And there are like half a dozen others who were Jewish or Christian in background that Muhammad was accused of consulting with and getting stories from. This is the level of story that a 5-year-old would have of the birth of Isaac. This is precisely the level of knowledge that a 5-year-old would have. That heard about that they heard news of Isaac and she laughed, and so Isaac was born. So again, one of the least honest and a very unhonest and unforthright uh, video was that Jacob means comes after, when it doesn't. It means heel. Now, there is a scholar of specifically Quranic Arabic and the Quran, uh, Marjane van Putten, and I probably just butchered his name. I believe it's Dutch. He points out that the Ain Kaf B root that exists, but in Arabic, in the word follow, which is akaba. So the author could have made a legitimate pun. He could have actually had the same root as as is in Jacob. He could have chosen that, but he didn't. He used a totally unrelated preposition instead, which is wara. So there was an opportunity for a legitimate Arabic pun. It would not be the correct meaning because the correct meaning is heel. But Allah, who is super clever, is not as smart as Van Putten and missed this very clear pun opportunity using the word follow.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there would be no miracle, right? There would be no miracle if you used the pun in Arabic. That'd just be something anyone could do. So that, you see, this is how you know that it is from Allah or something.
That you just lie about what it means.
Yeah, well, that too. So CK tried to respond once more. I literally just requested for proof that he took it from the Bible. Again, we don't have to provide proof, but you just heard numerous evidence that it was possible. There's also numerous linguistic evidence in the text that it comes later, including, ironically, the example you point out yourself, where most of the details are not present in the Quran. You said, why wouldn't it be present in Quran if it's the later revelation? You
Well, of
don't know
course
how
it would be
oral
present in the
storytelling works.
Quran if
Oral
it's being copied.
Yeah. Well, first of all,
So,
just from the
yeah,
surface, it would be readily easier to have less detail than to have all the detail. That should just be readily apparent. But additionally, people tend to think that like their first intuition is that stories grow over time. Actually, oral storytelling, usually the story becomes more truncated over time, right? It becomes briefer because the audience is expected to already be familiar with the story. So the skilled storyteller just says enough to make the audience recall what's going on. Think of an inside joke among your friends, right? Maybe one word is enough to set people laughing because they understand the context. But if there's someone present who doesn't understand the joke, then you reveal the whole context and explain why people are laughing. That's exactly the way oral storytelling works. The Quran derives from oral storytelling. Muhammad or whoever heard oral stories, heard abbreviated versions of the biblical text, and repeated them. And by the way, doesn't even try to hide this. He tells people to remember this, remember this, remember this, remember this. The audience is expected to know what he's talking about. There's not some proof of divine revelation. He knows that the audience knows these stories. And you're telling us it's impossible that he could have known the stories. That's what you're telling us. Unbelievable. All right, Mary. Sorry to interrupt you, but we actually have someone trying to interact, and I thought it would be worthwhile to address their response. So, were you done with Jacob, or you're on mute if you're
Oh,
talking?
yeah, we can move on to the next one. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So, number one was obvious coincidence. Number two shows evidence of copying from the Bible, not divine knowledge of Hebrew. That's what it shows. All right, let's go to example number 3 here. For some reason, I misplaced my screen, so give me 1 second. Find where I put that. Okay, there it is. Put that back up here. Example number 3 of linguistic miracles in the Quran.
Here's a third example, and you will start seeing it here yourself. يا يحيى خذ الكتاب بقوة وآتيناه الحكم صبيا وحنانا من لدنا وزكاة وكان تقيا. This ayah
Sorry
talks
for the
about
strangling
Prophet
cat sounds,
Yahya.
everyone.
Here, Allah uses a very unique word describing what He granted His Prophet, Hanana, which means compassion, kindness, gracefulness. This word was not used in the Quran except in this context in relation to His Prophet Yahya. And I think by now you can already guess the literal translation of the name Yahya or Yahuhanan, which
No, they're not the same thing.
literally
Okay, thank
I
you.
know.
means the
Hold on,
Lord
let me
has
finish. Let me
shown
just finish the
compassion
example.
or kindness, which is another incredible reference to what the actual meaning in Hebrew is.
All right, so before Mary gives us some useful information, let me just give my first thoughts here. First of all, the name Yahya is a mystery to people who study these things. They're not really quite sure how in the world the Quran came up with this name for John. There's a couple theories behind it, but it seems to be an odd choice. And so now he's going to need to go to the Hebrewisation of the Greek New Testament in order to make an argument. But that's suggesting that the Greek New Testament is uncorrupted and the Quran is corrupt because it no longer knows the meaning of the name. That's just on the
It doesn't even
surface.
have the right name. It doesn't. There is a
Right.
legitimate Arabic name that is borrowed from the Hebrew that was in circulation at the time, Yuhana,
Uh-huh.
Yuhana, and that is supposed to be that's exact same name as John or Yohanan and in Hebrew. It's the same name. It existed in Arabic at the time. The name John was in Hebrew first, was borrowed into other language, and one existed, an equivalent existed in Arabic, and it's used in the Tafsir about John the Apostle, and it's used by people like John of Damascus when he had wrote his name in Arabic. He used not Yahya but Yuhana. Why? Because that's how you change a name from Hebrew to Arabic, keeping the same trilateral root, keeping the same general sounds, and just making the alterations that you need to make between the two pronunciations, like Jean and John, because our John comes from Jean in French actually, and Jean is a later borrowing that comes from reading the name Jean in French, but the oral one is just John. So our John comes from French, which comes from Latin, which comes from Greek, which comes from the Hebrew. Like there's a system, there is a way in which the names alter.
And
So,
but before we get your slide with more detailed information, second thought of mine. This is another example of the Zechariah, where the divine name is part of the Hebrew name, and yet the Quran has no awareness of the divine name.
yep,
Weird, weird. How does the Quran have these linguistic miracles, arguably, but probably not in most cases, uh, conveying the meaning of the Hebrew word, which is supposedly the corrupted version of the pure Arabic, which doesn't have that meaning, and yet the Hebrew has the divine name. So what? They corrupted these names to add the name Yahweh and created the meaning that the Quran has in it? Is that what your argument is? I mean, seriously, did you think about this at all before you made the video? Of course not. Of course not. Whether the author of this video knows or not, I can't say. But certainly 99% of his Muslim audience will have no idea that these names contain a reference to the divine name Yahweh. And so whether he knows it or not, he's certainly not going to tell them. And they're going to think, oh, this is so miraculous. There is a correspondence of these names. Oh,
yep.
goodness. All right. I'll pull up your slide now.
All right. So here it is. Oh, Yahya. The name is Yahya. Hold the book with strength. And we gave him the wisdom, and perhaps as a child is meant here, and
Of a
pity or
child? I don't know.
graciousness. Well, it's not.
Oh, right.
It,
I'm saying,
the
yes,
wisdom
as is the
and
only way to make
child is marked the same. It's in the
right.
same.
Uh,
It's
As is the only way to make it make sense, but it doesn't actually make sense. Is the point,
Yeah.
right?
I'm not sure about the grammar. It's a really unusual
Maybe he gave him
structure in
child.
Arabic.
Yeah, like so you could probably say he gave him childish wisdom. I think that would probably be a accurate Arabic translation, but that's not what they want it to say. They wanted to say
Yeah.
give him the wisdom as a child. Anyway, sorry for
Yeah.
that aside.
But anyway, and pity or graciousness from us. So it's a pity kind of mercy. It's not mercy in another sense, which is fine. Graciousness from us and purity, and he was wary. Now the question is Yahya the name of any biblical figure?
No.
No. His name is
I
John.
suppose that it would be Yahweh Yahweh though if it was.
I guess it's John from Yohanan or Yehohanan, which is Yahweh is gracious. And the question is Hanan equivalent to Arabic Hana? And the answer is yes. So they are actually the Hebrew and the Arabic of gracious here are actually equivalent. But the
Hey,
issue
there
is
you go.
Yahweh is gracious, and it is the only time it's used. Now, this shows that there's a very good chance that Mohammed darn well heard him called Yohanan or the existing Arabic Yuhana, and he went with the name Yahya anyway. This
Huh.
does indicate that he is familiar, most likely, with Yuhana because it is the only time that's used, but he went with Yahya anyway, which is completely baffling. Now, there is an interesting fact that Yahya exists in the Mandaean religion as a secret name for John. The issue with the Mandaean sources is that they're not incredibly well documented in terms of their historicity. Like we have copies, but we don't know when the originals are from. Mandaean the Mandaean religion seems to have been a second century weird Gnostic sect that grew, but we don't know when the texts that they, what editorial processes they underwent or whatever. But it is quite possible that they were the ones who originated Yahya as a name for John, else
Hmm.
or else it could have been a pattern that we see with Asa that was discovered and given a good explanation by Al-Jalad or Al-Jalad, Jalad, Al-Jalad, sorry, um, that there was an inscription found that says Asa originally, and Asa is actually it goes through various phonological processes that change its pronunciation in Arabic from the northern dialect where it originally came from, so that it's completely like opaque in the Kufan form, Isa, which is what everybody says it is now. In Muhammad's dialect, it was like Isa, which would have been easier to trace back to its original meaning. And that was probably means redeemer or ransomer and was used as a title for Jesus by some people who identified themselves as followers of Jesus. A very, very small group because there is only one inscription that was ever found. But out in the desert, some of the wandering people, rather than translating the name Yeshua, instead they chose a name with an existing name with a meaning that had that the name was very slightly similar to Yeshua, only very slightly, but had a relevant meaning. It means redeemer or ransomer, which is an appropriate meaning for Jesus. So rather than letting the word undergo phonological changes into their own dialect, they chose a name that had a title and a meaning that was appropriate for the role of Christ and used that instead. No idea what they actually believed. And it is possible that Yahya originally existed as a name that was chosen because of its meaning and very slight similarity to John, because it has the root of the rough H YY, and then Yahya, what is the non-declined present form of the verb to live. So it means to live. So if you're talking about, oh, John came to teach people that God is coming to bring life, maybe you'd choose the name Yahya for him in Arabic. But this would be a very Arabic centric naming system. It arose out of Arabic. It is not his name, cannot possibly be his name in Hebrew. It is an Arabic word, just like Isay was an Arabic an Arabic name. That would be similar to people named Simeon choosing the name Simon, people named Saul choosing the name Paul, people named Judah choosing the name Thaddeus, things that are
Hmm.
similar, but there
Hmm.
is an existing name in another language that you're choosing to be your own name, instead of reproducing the closest sounds to that name. But again, it shows that that the author of the Quran is choosing this really weird name, possibly
Hmm.
used, definitely used by a heretical group later on, possibly used by some other weird group out in the desert, over the actual real name of the person,
Uh-huh.
probably because of local preferences and local
Yeah,
exposure to
and
it.
so to be clear, two things. One, it is debatable whether the Mandaean religion borrows from the Muslim tradition or vice versa. because there's a possibility that they intentionally changed the name to be like, look, we have a book too. We're people of the book. You can't kill us. So scholars debate which way that went, and Mary left open that possibility. So that's one.
Yep.
But if it's pre-existing, right, then it takes it from that. And two, I wouldn't say that this is definitive proof that the author of the Quran doesn't know what they're talking about. I think it's perfectly acceptable to use the local version of a name, but it's certainly nothing miraculous, right? To use a local weird version of a name is not miraculous. That's just normal. That's what any human being in that particular region would have done. It doesn't prove that it couldn't be God speaking, but it certainly can't prove that it's miraculous, and yet that's what the author of this video wants to argue, that this is miraculous because if you take not the Arabic, but if you take the Hebrew, which is supposedly not the correct name, right, because the Arabic's supposed to be the correct name according to Muslim theology, then the Quran contains the same word as a portion of its meaning, but not the other portion because it doesn't contain Yahweh. That's the miracle here, that half of the name is conveyed by the Quran, and the important half, Yahweh, the divine name, the Quran has no knowledge of whatsoever. Somehow, in all these linguistic miracles throughout the entire Quran, Allah is completely unaware that he used to call himself Yahweh. Weird, 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 weird.
Yeah, and choosing a random, some other name, and I would presume that it was a name that was preferred locally, and that he's kind of doing this thing like, yeah, I know the other name, but I'm choosing this one. Why are you choosing the wrong name? Shouldn't you know, being Allah, what his name actually was? Why are you choosing a name that cannot possibly be the name of John the Baptist? John the Baptist could not have been named Yahya, could not be.
Indeed. Yeah, it can't be his real name, right? There would be no sane person would argue that. Now, I should say, would argue that with in good conscience, right? Some intelligent people might have to argue that because the Quranic theology, Islamic theology, forces them into it, but no one would come to that conclusion on their own. Any person who has no preconceived notion about the Quran being the literal speech of God would say, obviously, this is a later derivative of the original Hebrew name.
Wait 1 second. So CK is actually making a point here, and I think he's beginning to grasp it. But using your same argumentation, it could be that it was taken from a lost, literally, that predated the religion. Yes, that's the point. It came from somewhere. The actual name of John the Baptist is fixed. It is clear that it was John the Baptist. Yahya probably comes from something else, and it's not correct. So it comes from some sort of other weird pre-existing tradition, and because it seems to be the preferred tradition in the area that Muhammad happened to be living in, he went with the wrong name while doing yeah, I know this other name, but we have had it right all along. It really was this Yahya. Now, would he know the other name? Yes. Remember who his the woman who was basically like a mother to him was Barakah, who was Ethiopian. What do you think Ethiopians called John the Baptist? They called him John in their language. They did not call him Yahya or anything like that. So, yes, everyone would have known that his other name was John the Baptist, but he's going after something that isn't scripture, that's some other oral tradition, maybe for good reasons. Maybe there were legitimate
Right.
true
Yeah.
believers who
So
used this
I
name, but it's not his actual name.
right. Right. So again, I wouldn't say that this particular example, I would not say is clear evidence of the author not being God, because God could choose to use the local term for a particular individual, and I would find that perfectly acceptable. Like if God was revealing something to us today, which he wouldn't do because scripture is closed, but just hypothetically, if he was revealing new scripture in English today, I think it would be perfectly fine to say Jesus and saying instead of saying Yeshua, right? I think that would be perfectly fine. So if it's a new revelation in the 6th century and it's in the local language, I would find that to be acceptable. But that's not what Islamic theology says that the Quran is. So, you got a problem with your theology, but not necessarily proof that this is not from God. So, understand the argument. However, what you certainly don't have is evidence that this is from God, because a local person in the 6th century would use the local term. So how could that possibly be miraculous? It couldn't be. And yet, that's what the video suggests, that this is somehow miraculous.
Yes. And we're ready for the next argument.
All
Yep.
right. And CK, I appreciate you trying to. Yeah, okay, so he also said that Allah literally means the God. Yeah, the Quran doesn't know the divine name.
At all.
The Hebrew Bible does.
It uses a
Why?
title and it turns it into the name of God.
Yep,
The name of your God is Allah, which comes from a title meaning the God.
correct.
Allah
It's definitely
was
used
the
as a name.
God who had 3 daughters. He was a God of 3 daughters. And Islam takes that title and says that the God of 3 daughters who was worshipped through a rock is actually the God of Abraham and Isaac, which is ridiculous. So,
And then he said how so, which was probably not into response to what you just said, but whatever was said before that, which, sorry, I'm not recalling what you said right before that. So, CK, there's a delay. So when you type things, could you try to be clear what you're responding to? Just saying how so isn't enough information to know what it's responding to, because you're hearing things a minute or two after we say them, so then we no longer know what you're asking about. So instead of saying how so, say how is X true? Would appreciate
yeah,
that.
if you're talking about he was a God of 3 daughters, this is well established that there was a title.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's probably
Yeah.
asking how so is Allah a name. Probably is what he's asking, but I don't know
So
that for a
I
fact.
want you to tell me what the Bismillah is. It says in the name of Allah. So what is his name? What do you say? What demon's name do you say over animals when you kill them for it to be permissible for you to eat? All right. And yes, that's what we've been. That is what we've been.
Yeah, that was on the slide earlier there. And Mary also gave the Yohekanon, which is a longer version of the name, which it could also be the Hebrew name behind it, right? So Mary was not wrong, and you're not wrong either. You both said the same thing. All right,
Yep.
let's get the video back up here.
Even the name Ibrahim, Millata Abikum Ibrahim, it is the religion of your father, Abraham. Again, the name Ibrahim literally means the father of many nations in Hebrew. And Allah refers to him in this ayah as your father, the father of many nations. But the Quran being the miracle that it is, it takes such references to an even deeper level. In this ayah, when Allah
Go
gave
ahead and stop
Bani
it.
Israel a command,
Wait,
Oh, okay.
wait.
I just
Yeah,
assumed that
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 was
was
it.
more
That
on.
was it. That's an
I assumed
argument.
that was going to be more on Abraham since they didn't say
No,
example
it's
5 or
not.
whatever. So that's
No.
going to be something else. So we're just talking about the linguistic miracle of Abraham, meaning father.
Being
Um,
called your father.
being called your father. Right.
Yes.
So Mary, does the biblical text make it clear that Abraham is the father of many nations?
Yes.
So you're saying that you wouldn't have to know Hebrew to know that Abraham is your father.
Well, what's really interesting is that he makes a point, your father of many nations, but the Quran has no idea that he's the father of many nations. He thinks that he's just the father of 2 nations,
That's true, right?
the
Because
Arabs and the Jews, and that's it.
yep.
That's what the Quran says. So I don't know what he's talking about, knowing that he's the father of many nations. Now let's actually look at that ayah. So it says, and jihad for Allah as is his due in jihad, for he has chosen you and has laid upon you no impediment in your religious code, the creed or confession. The word is like a confession, a spoken word, but like not confessing to a crime, but like a creed type of confession. So that's why I have creed/confession for clarity of your father. Ibrahim. So why? Why Ibrahim? It should be Abraham with one short and two long two alepphs and then one short a vowel. So when you borrow from another language, you do so consistently following rules and laws. There is no reason to turn the Abraham in Hebrew or Avraham in later Hebrew into Ibrahim. There's no reason for those vowel changes. They're wrong. They are errors. Now, it's noted that one early Arabic writing style, uh, like would use a mater lectionis, which is a mother of reading, is literally what it means, is a particular letter that normally represents a uh, a consonant, but you put it in for certain vowel sounds. And this was used for the uh, first in Shaitan as well as the second in Abraham. And it's an odd feature because it's an odd feature to have two long vowels together like that together in Arabic. Now, here's where things get really weird. Satan should be what the word for Satan is. It shouldn't be shaitan, but it appears to be borrowed instead from Ethiopian Gaez instead of directly from Hebrew, from the same language that his nurse spoke, Baraka. And so that Ethiopian pronunciation was applied to Satan, and so it was interpreted as that mater lectionis, indicating an E sound, that Y that's written in there. And so then that seems to have been misread onto the other word, and Abraham became Abrahim, or and just shifting the first vowel with a little mark, change it from ah to I. So this actually seems to be a case of whispers where people actually didn't know what Abraham should have sounded like, and so change it to something else. It does indicate that the first time that the Meccans encountered Abraham, if the Ibrahim pronunciation is from Muhammad and not because of later reciters, this would mean that the Meccans first encountered Abraham, the name, in writing before they ever encountered it in speech, such as perhaps Waraka made this Ibrahim well known through his stories, and he was known to read and write and to have written documents. Um, Now, in contrast to that, the Ase in Hijazi, or which later became Isa in Kufan, that has to be through oral transmission that these sound changes happen. But it seems to be through the written word, either the Meccans corrupted it before Muhammad even spoke it, or the reciters just didn't recite the bits about Abraham enough to remember how his name should be recited, and somebody began to recite it Ibrahim, and that was considered just like really sophisticated and lovely sounding, and so it became really popular or something. But it shows a corruption. So if it and one of the other difficulties is that it's supposed to be wordplay that Abraham is called a father here, but the term of father is extremely common in the Quran for all kinds of ancestors. Your father this, your father that, your father this, your father that, your father's here, your father's there. It's all over the place. There's no other name except for their father that Abraham would be called. Like that would be the title for him. It
Hmm.
has no connection to the meaning of his name. All the people who are
Yeah,
attributed with ancestry are called father in the Quran consistently and frequently. So that's
yeah, that was going to be my
not
other
even a
point.
point.
Right, that was going to be my other point, is that it's also just a natural term, right? Even if the biblical text makes that explicit, so it could derive from the biblical text, or it's just a natural claim that someone whose descendants you're referring to is the father of those people. I mean, he's not the literal father, but he's the metaphorical father, or the father in the broader sense of the term. That's just ordinary use of language. So how is this like something divine, or that must be divine, right? The only possible way that this person who is the ancestor of the people in reference is called father is because the author knows that in Hebrew, but not in Arabic, it means his name means father of nations. There aren't many nations named in the Quran, but the author knows that, and he doesn't care to mention all those other nations that derive from Abraham. Okay.
And if it
That,
hadn't been corrupted, a really important point, if it hadn't been corrupted, it would have been transparent. Abu, Lahab, uh, Rafi, Abu Bakr, Ab is the father element of that. So the only reason why it wouldn't be transparent is that Allah messed up the name, or someone else. I mean, in the early writings, in the early written versions, it could be Abraham. There's nothing that makes it Ibrahim. It could very well be Abraham. But Allah allowed his text to be distorted, and that's the only way in which the secret clever thing, which isn't secret, isn't secret or clever at all, can even exist, is because of this corruption. But it isn't a phonological process of Arabic to change these sounds. They should not have been changed like that. Abraham is a perfectly fine Arabic name. There's nothing wrong with it, like inherently wrong with it in Arabic.
absolutely. Absolutely. So this is closer to the Zechariah example here, right? Where it's something that is just an obvious coincidence, as opposed to probably deriving from the biblical text. But notice again, right? I only have to show that something is plausible. I don't have to, it could plausibly come from understanding the biblical story. It could plausibly come from just a generic use of the term father. Either one is fine. There's no linguistic miracle if there's one or more plausible explanations that don't involve divine knowledge, right? That's all that we have to demonstrate. And just on the surface, it's way more probable that's what's going on because the Quran doesn't reference, right? The Zechariah example was supposedly exactly word for word correspondence, even though it was a false translation of the Hebrew, but it was supposedly exact word for word coordination. So why doesn't this say, let me put it back on the screen just for reference, instead of the father of many nations, your father, why doesn't it say, sorry, having issues getting it to pop up. There we go. Instead of the father of many nations, right, Abraham, instead of Abraham, your father, why doesn't it say Abraham, the father of many nations? That would be exact word for word correspondence, what we supposedly had in Zechariah. It seems that just anything goes, right? Where's the standard? If this is supposed to be some pattern that shows the divine authorship, then there should be a pattern. Not every example be different. And every example is different. And most of them are really stupid. And this is the proof that the Quran could only be from Allah.
My question was, with the understanding that the children of
Father
Israel
of many
come
nations.
from
The
Abraham,
Quran being
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
with the understanding the children of Israel come from Abraham, and that the Arabs supposedly come from Ishmael, what else would he be called except their father? Like in Arabic, what other term would you use? There is no other term to use. That's the killer. But go ahead. Next.
And everyone in the audience, please, when we have a Muslim that's actually willing to engage on the topic like CK is, stop distracting them with other things. I get it. You want to raise other points against Islam. But when they want to address the topic, don't distract them. I want interaction, right? I want Muslims to actually address this topic. CK came in here and he showed an unusually good level of attempt to respond to our arguments. And I was appreciating that. And then you got them all talking about whether Allah is a moon god or not. Please don't do that, guys, please. All right. Oh, he came as a Muslim and now he's leaving as a Muslim with the same level of Imam. I thought it was supposed to be increased. by these streams.
Yeah, that's what you're supposed to say. Just
You
so
got
you
your name
know.
wrong there.
Yeah, what you're supposed to say is my iman is increased. I have now know that I've been lied to, but I have greater faith because people lie to me and think that I'm stupid, and I'm going to believe this as proof for Islam. Because I mean, the guy's lying to you. He's trying to trick you.
Yeah.
Right.
And again,
Oh,
right? Your first, in response to your first comment, again, the things we're saying don't disprove Islam. That's not the purpose of this video. But what it does prove is that the Arabic 101 channel is lying to you, that they are making a false argument in favor of Islam. That's what the purpose of this stream is, to show you that that channel has made a false argument that they almost certainly knew was false, as you can see by the fact that on some of them they're like, this is a unique word, that's what makes it meaningful. And then others, they just don't tell you that the word's used 200 times in the Quran, but yet that's supposed to be why it's meaningful, which that means by their own logic this one isn't meaningful, and yet they give it anyway. Do you see the dishonesty of the Arabic 101 channel? I hope you do.
all right. The
Did
next
you
one is great.
I was going to say,
The
did
next
you have
one's
anything else on that one? But apparently not.
no, there's nothing more.
Okay. Very good, then. Let's continue on here. Let me clear out this comment.
The miracle that it is. It takes such references to an even deeper level.
Let's
In
go
this
deep,
ayah,
guys.
when
Deep
Allah
dive.
gave Bani Israel a command, خُذُوا مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ وَاسْمَعُوا. Take what we have given you with determination and listen. But let's see what they said. قَالُوا سَمِعْنَا وَعَصَيْنَا. They said, we hear and we disobey. Well, from the surface, this sounds like a normal ayah. Bani
Yeah, it
Israel
does.
refusing
Thanks for
Allah's
pointing
command.
that out.
But here's something very interesting. If you look at how this story is mentioned in the Torah, specifically in Deuteronomy 5:27, you will notice that it says, we will listen and obey. Now, this is, of course, a translated version from the original Hebrew text. So let's look at what this phrase sounds like in its original
Oh my
Hebrew.
God.
وَشَمِعْنُوا وَعَصِينُوا. This is what we hear and we obey sounds like in Hebrew. And in the Quran, it says, قَالُوا سَمِعْنَا وَعَصَيْنَا. We heard and we disobeyed. You can clearly hear the similarity of how these two phrases sound like across the two languages, which is a clear reference to what they claim to have said in the Torah, while in reality, they listened, but they disobeyed.
Oh my gosh. Okay,
Pause
so
it. Hang on.
Mary, yeah, hold on.
Yeah.
Let me be expert. Wait, did you want me to play more? Is that what you're saying?
No,
Or pause it?
I want to make a point before you say anything, because this
Okay.
similarity is recognized by many Western scholars. They realize that the Quran here is taking the words of the Torah and are twisting and distorting it to mean the opposite of what it actually means. So, other scholars, plenty of Western scholars, it is the mainstream opinion that this is taking words from the Torah and twisting them, corrupting them, changing them around, and to make them as if they are saying the opposite of what it actually says. Now, remember when I said I wanted everyone to pay attention to 5:7,
Be
in
here and obey.
which, yeah, if you can bring this up really quickly.
Oh, okay. But you haven't let me react yet.
But I
You're
just want
going
to make this
straight
one
into
point.
your.
Yep. But I'll let you go as soon as I do this. But remember in 5:7, the Quran says that they in fact did say we hear and we obey. So the Quran does affirm the words that are
Uh-huh.
in the Torah. They really said we hear and we obey. But now we're at another ayah, and instead it accuses them of saying the opposite by
Uh-huh.
twisting and distorting the words of the Torah. So go ahead and give your
All
reaction.
right. All right. So here's my initial thoughts, right? And I'm not an expert on Arabic or anything, but the argument here was that they sound similar, and thus the Quran is actually saying or correcting the Hebrew or something across that. This is absurd on the surface of it, okay? Because we have two semantic languages, sometimes words are very different, but sometimes they're the same. And if they're pretty similar words, they're going to sound similar. And to make it a negative, you just add a negative particle. So the negative is going to sound very similar to the positive.
It's not similar in that way. It's similar in a totally different way. Just so you know. That's why I knew you hadn't looked at this ahead of time, so you
Well,
couldn't
that's
know
fine,
this.
right? That's fine. I'm just saying and maybe there's more to this, right? So Mary will do the more to this. But the mere fact they sound the same is not surprising. And maybe it is because of the details I don't understand. And thus why Mary said that scholars have recognized this as an intentional situation. But just on the surface, sounding the same doesn't make any sense as an argument to me. Okay, when you translate words across languages, sometimes they sound the same. That's not a linguistic miracle, but I guess
So
it's not actually
yeah,
a
it's no,
translation.
it is an actual distortion of the text, and it's making fun of what was said, because this section in Deuteronomy would be something that would be read frequently in Medina. It would be something that Muhammad would hear. It would be something that Muhammad's convert, uh, what is his name, Abdullah ibn Salam. Anyway, his I forgot his name. His
So,
Jewish
but you're
convert
so what you're going to say is
would
this is
know.
actually clever, but it's a clever thing that a human being could easily do.
It's a clever thing that a human being could easily do, but not only that, but it makes Allah a liar, because Allah has already affirmed that the words that they said
Right.
were, we
We
hear and
hear and
obey.
we
He
obey.
has affirmed that. He has affirmed that. So if you
Right.
pull up
So
my
so
notes,
a lot so clear contradiction in the Quran, right?
yeah,
Because in one place Allah says they heard and they obeyed. In the other place He says they heard and they didn't obey. Or more accurately, they said the words we hear and obey, and they said the words we hear and won't obey,
yeah,
or and disobey, as the
or
translation here has.
rebel, or however you want to translate it. So yeah, if you bring
All
it
right, so
up
let's get the
here,
details here, but
yep.
my surface reaction was perhaps wrong. That maybe there is something more subtle going on here.
Yeah. So, and when we took compact with you and raised over you the mount, take forcefully what we have given you and give ear. They said, we hear and rebel. Now remember, 5:7, it says that they said, we hear and obey. This is a contradiction. Which one did they say? And they were made to drink the calf in their hearts for their unbelief, say evil is the thing your faith bids you to, if you are believers, which is a particularly insane thing. Evil is the thing that your faith bids you to, if you are believers. So you are believers. If you are believers, then your faith is bidding you to evil. And believers is always used of people who have the true faith. They aren't used of false believers. So, anyway, Allah here is lying. The Hebrew of Deuteronomy says, uh, uh, Shama nu, and that's we hear, same as Sami na, we hear again, wa wa, and both are the same, and they're Semitic languages. These are all cognates of one another. And then the top part is we hear and do, or we hear and obey. We hear and we do what we have heard. The bottom one is an unrelated root. The difference between the S's, that little tick over one and the dot under the other, makes them totally unrelated uh, letters. They sound a lot the same to us, but they aren't related to each other, even though they sound really related. So these are totally different, separate roots, which is we hear and disobey. And Allah distorts the text with his tongue and hands by refusing to give the true answer, which he gave earlier, which is we hear and do, or we hear and obey, and instead makes it mean the opposite by twisting the words, by distorting it. Now, there is no word for disobey in Hebrew with the same root, not disobey, rebel. Like I tried like 15 different synonyms. I looked it up in the Semitic roots database. I looked it up a whole bunch of different ways. There is no word with the Arabic root here that it could have been perhaps maybe, right? If you're saying,
Couldn't
but
they
no,
just
no, that's
have
what the Torah actually says, even though in context it cannot have possibly said that. So this
couldn't
is
they have
not,
just hold on, Mary,
yeah.
1 second. Couldn't they have just added a negative participle though? I mean, Hebrew has a couple negative participles.
Well, yeah, they could have
Then it
added
would sound so like,
not, or
we will
surely
never
not,
obey
or
or we
anything
will
like
not
that.
obey or something
Yeah,
like that. So
but
then it
that's not
could
what's
still
happening
sound
here.
similar is what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, it
It
could,
can't
but
be a
that's not what's happening here. It's just it's a
right.
totally different word that is somewhat similar in sounding. It has two of the same consonants,
It's
and
a Zachariah argument is what you're saying.
yeah, it has two of the same consonants and kind of similar-ish vowels, but not really. So the question is, did Muhammad have access to Hebrew recitations at this time? Yes, he would have. He was in Mecca. He was interacting with Jews every day. So he absolutely would have had access to Hebrew recitations of the Torah at this time when he declared that what they said was actually the opposite of what they actually said. But the point is, even though it is very similar in sound going from Hebrew to Arabic, that Arabic word does not have a similar sounding word with the same meaning back in Hebrew again. You can't get back to Hebrew with that.
Yes, which is a serious problem here, right? Because I'm going to refine my initial comments based on new information, right? That's what you should do if you're a reasonable person, is you should have revised your opinion based on new information. I think this is actually something clever being done, but the only way it works is if the Quran is derivative, if it comes second and is already aware of the Hebrew. The Hebrew cannot be derivative of the Arabic, because then that would be proof that the biblical text is doing something creative, right? That the biblical text is intentionally correcting the Quran. The only way it can be as intentional is if you come second, right? Intentional reference to an existing text, which means the Quran has to be secondary. It has to be derivative. So I'm giving credit where credit is due. Whoever wrote this did something creative. They did something intelligent, but they could have only done that if the Hebrew text already existed. The Hebrew
And
text
it only
can't
exists
be
because it,
derivative from the Arabic.
right, the Arabic has to be a derivative from that, from the Hebrew. It's a derivative, it's a distortion of it,
Exactly.
it is a negation of it. It comes from it and has the opposite meaning. Therefore, he is taking a text in which Allah distorts and lies about his words. Unless this, the only way you can read it in which this is not the case is if this is sarcastic. But there's nothing in here that tells us that this is sarcastic.
Right. So there's a clear contradiction in the Quran. That's a problem for the Quran. For this passage, seems to be wordplay on the Hebrew, but that means the Hebrew has to exist and the author has to have access to it. Even if the author's God, he still has to have access to the Hebrew, which means the Quran can't be the original revelation that got corrupted. Because he can't have responded to the corruption before the corruption happened. And the corruption can't come from the Arabic. It doesn't work the other direction. It only works one direction. So interesting, but not proof that it's from God. Proof that the author's intelligent, at least on this point, or at least the author of
I
this
mean, it
particular
just
line.
sounds like he heard someone reciting the Hebrew and it
Yeah,
sounded
I
like
mean, a moderately
Arabic,
intelligent
and
person can come up with a creative
yep,
pun, and this is a creative pun. I'm giving credit where credit's due. This one's actually good. This one actually shows a relationship between the texts,
yeah. But the
but it shows
problem
the
is
Quran's
again,
derivative, which is the opposite of what they want to show.
he's either contradicting himself.
Yep,
I mean, he is contradicting himself, unless he's being massively sarcastic here and is not actually meaning this.
yep. Yeah, he
So
also
that's
contradicted
a,
himself, but that's a separate issue from this particular thing. Let me take this super chat from Descripture Plug Albert.
Wasting your time on social media is one of the best deeds a Muslim can do. There's a huge need for it. You know this and I know this. So that makes the reward even greater. So give generously and Allah Azza wa Jal will give you even more.
You're entitled for some steep rewards from Allah since you are wasting your evening on social media today. He says, like, sub, and share. Good advice. Good advice. God bless both of you. Thank you for that. And God bless you and your ministry as well, Albert. Thank you for that. And then a random comment that from Alexander, is Thais' hair getting longer? I think it looks really good on him. Well, thank you for that. And yes, that's generally how it works. Your hair kind of steadily gets longer until you cut it. So it is technically getting longer. I'm not necessarily purposely growing it out to a longer length, however. We'll see, right? I don't generally have very short hair. Like my entire adult life, I've very rarely had extremely short hair. So it'll probably be at least somewhat long, but I am probably getting a haircut or at least a trim fairly soon. All right. We ready for the next one, or did you have more to say on this one?
Nope, we're ready for the next one, which is the last one.
All right. We're getting through this in pretty decent speed here.
Which is good
I
because I'm really
do
hungry.
want to give credit where credit is due. This is a well-made video by
Oh, it's
Arabic
very well
101.
made.
I can certainly see why this video has performed very well on YouTube. If you have no knowledge and you're just an average Muslim seeing this, you probably are quite impressed by these things. However, as with any dawah argument, once you go below the surface, it doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
Such references that transcend and go beyond a single language requires that you know both Arabic and Hebrew to get it, let alone to produce something like this. And this was
That's actually not true. Well, to get it, yes. To get it, you would have to know both languages. But to produce something like it, you would actually only have to be familiar with the story, as we've shown several times. Except for that last example. That last example, you would actually have to know the Hebrew. That would be the one exception.
In this one, what you would have to do is you would have had to have heard the word said and Hebrew, and then somebody tells you what they mean.
Yeah, you would have to know Hebrew, but you would have to
Unless
have
you're,
heard the words.
yeah, you would have had to have heard the words and somebody told you what they mean, and you're like, haha, that sounds a lot like rebel in Arabic, so that's what you really said.
Yeah, and you could play that game, as some people were pointing out examples from their own languages, how they would mean something completely different if you just literally translated the word in English. And sometimes you do find very creative things like this in literature, where it takes a word that the audience, whether that's an English audience or a Spanish audience or whatever, will know well, but then it puts it in a mouth of someone speaking a different language, and then if you know both languages, you see the joke, right? Not super common, but it is something that human beings do from time to time. So the author of the Quran has not proven himself not to be a human being. Let's continue.
something that Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, could not have done himself, simply because he did not only know Hebrew, but he was even unlettered in Arabic. But it is
Lacking the
It's an
technical ability
oral
to read it.
pun. It's oral. It's spoken.
Yeah.
It's completely
La-
oral.
Lacking the technical ability to read and write has absolutely nothing to do with it. I'm so sick of Muslims bringing this up, even though that's probably not what the Quran means. Even if that is what it means, it has no bearing on whether or not Muhammad could have copied stories. Every argument that made by someone knowledgeable would say that this is the result of oral storytelling, which does not require you to be literate. All right, let's continue.
the one who knows everything that has revealed the Quran. And
Except
while
for the
such
divine name.
subtleties may have not been this clear to the Arabs, since they were more challenging to Bani Israel, there were other types of linguistic and stylistic subtleties that can be seen and noticed by the Arabs, like a portion of this ayat whose meaning reflects.
Wait, okay. So apparently the rest is going to be, I haven't seen it yet, but the rest is going to be on things that Arab speakers would have readily known, which means that they can't possibly be miracles, because that means any Arabic speaker would be able to make the reference. Am I wrong, Mary? I mean, is it going to make
It isn't
something
even
better?
that. It gets even goofier than that.
Because he just said the rest. So there's other linguistic subtleties that would have been apparent to the Arab audience. That means it would have been apparent to an Arabic author too.
Yeah.
How is that an argument? Oh my
I don't know.
gosh.
How it can actually be read. وهو الذي
Again, sorry
خلق
for the cat
الليل
screeching.
والنهار والشمس والقمر كل في فلك يسبحون. And he is the one who created the night and the day and the sun and the moon, all in an orbit, swimming.
Now, I would not, I would not go to this verse if I was a Muslim. I actually have heard Muslims go to this as some kind of miracle,
Yep.
so I have a good idea where this is going. But swimming, because they're in water, because ancient people thought that space was composed of water.
Yes.
Linguistic miracle.
Interestingly, this part of the ayah can be read the same way in both directions. كل في فلك.
Oh no, it's a
كل في
palindrome.
فلك,
I actually
Yeah.
referring to
have
the
heard this
actual
stupidity
meaning
before.
of the phrase itself. Finally, if you are already thinking, well, I can make
Okay, so that's apparently it. That's all. He actually doesn't go into the much longer argument. All he says is, and he didn't even use the word palindrome, but he says that it can be read the same way forwards and backwards, which is like being in orbit. Guess what? This is something that is readily apparent to a speaker in Arabic. In other words, an author could have easily done this intentionally and probably did. Uh,
I don't think that this was intentional
you
at
think this
all.
one's accidental? I mean, it could be
I think
accidental
it's
too.
totally accidental. The thing is that you can do it by leaving out all of the other part, like by taking only the rasam. You're taking only, yes, and swimming does mean literally. They are literally swimming through things. This is not poetic language. They're swimming. But
Yeah, because they think it's water.
you're only looking at the consonantal text, and then you're inserting whatever vowels fit. That makes things very, very easy for
Okay,
doing
yeah, you're saying that
palindromes.
it could easily be accidental, which I could also buy. I mean,
Yeah,
I could buy
yeah.
that was intentional,
No, I don't
but
think
I
it was
could also
intentional
buy
at
that it
all.
was accidental because you're right. When you take out the vowels, it becomes much easier to do.
Like infinitely easy. It's infinitely easier to make
Well, I mean, not
palindromes
strictly
in
speaking,
Arabic.
infinitely, but
Well, with the fact that so much of the case and a lot of like so much is contained in the vowels grammatically, that really, really helps too. That the
that's true.
actual consonants have so little, that they are the root meanings, but then all the other bits are supplied by the bits that you can
Yeah.
swap
So,
and
in other
add.
words,
It
the
makes it
sentence is
way
high.
easier.
To put it in different terms, the sentence is highly ambiguous without the vowels because you can't figure out the tense, which means it could be past tense, future tense, right? Which is highly ambiguous, and other things, right? You can't figure out gender and such sometimes, um, and so you can't necessarily figure out the speaker. And anyway, it has lots of ambiguity without the vowels, um, and thus it's not hard. The point being, though, is that you're taking out a large percentage of the information.
Yeah, and
Obviously, most of you
he's
don't know
about to show
Arabic,
you.
but just look at
Yeah,
English. Just look at English, look at a sentence, and you'll see that roughly, I don't know, 40% or so of the letters are vowels. You take out 40% of the letters, and it becomes a lot easier for the remaining letters to be read the same way forwards and backwards.
yeah. Go ahead and play all the rest of this because it will show that palindrome poetry is something that Arabs do all the time because it is so much easier in Arabic. But
Oh, so it's even going
let's
to
go ahead and
tell us
play.
that this is
Yeah,
something
let's
human
play it
beings
all the way
do?
to the end because like this
Okay,
is his last point.
that's fine, right? There's only a minute and a bit left. I might pause. Does he have like some concluding comments? I will pause before those if he does.
Yeah, pause before those.
All right, let's go.
something similar to what we've seen today. Some Arab poets have even written poems that could be read from right to left and from left to right. And by looking up some meanings of names, I too can come up with such references. And this is exactly where most of these oppositions get it wrong. They only look at the Quran from a single angle, and they want to imitate it, and
Okay,
they
and the
leave
rest is just the
everything else
conclusion.
Oh
behind.
yeah,
Like
the
I
rest
Indeed,
might
didn't
be his
no.
actually make
conclusion.
any of these arguments, but I'm now going to appeal to them. So I know that
Right.
I've made a terrible case, But
Wait, yeah. So let me just say something. So he actually just admitted that this is not what he titled the video, right? The Hebrew word that proved that the Quran is from Allah. He actually admitted that it's not the case. Now he's going to say that it's a cumulative case. That yes, any of these examples that you may mean could have done, but there's too many of them. Even though he only had what, 5, 6, something like that. There's too many of them for this to be done. Even though I obviously had to stretch pretty far because some of these are just crap on the surface. No, this is not a miracle. I bet he said other uh, Arabic poets have done this. I bet you there's poems that have a lot more than one palindrome in them.
yes.
So if there's poems that have multiple palindromes, then that might tell you that the number in the Quran is not exceptional. The book of Job, without the vowels, if you shift everything by one letter, you can get a different text out of it. That's almost certainly intentional by the author. Extremely hard to do, but not a miracle. And that's not the only place in the Bible that occurs. It occurs a few other times where Hebrew also is traditionally written without the vowels. So that means that you can play games, right? You can do creative things, but you're still a human being doing them. And so someone doing something creative with the Quran, even if they did, but if there's only one palindrome, I'm going to say it probably is coincidence. If there's a bunch, then maybe they did it intentionally. But if there's just one, it's probably coincidence. But even if there's a ton of them, this is something anyone else could do. What he needs to show that there's a consistent pattern to this. Every one of his examples was arbitrary. None of them were of the same type. Guess what? I can do that with any text. I could do that with a really poorly written text. Let's say a newspaper article, right? Written super quick, not a lot of thought into it, done for the moment. I can go to a random news article and I can find some interesting things because this is the way math works. There are literally an infinite number of combinations of the way you can look at things. And if you only show the ones that look interesting, then it looks interesting. But you have to ignore the 99.99% that don't look interesting. The Quran mentions a couple dozen names. Are all of them interesting? No, probably only the 3 that they argued, even though only one of them was even actually interesting. Does the Quran contain hundreds of palindromes or just one? Does the Quran contain a pattern that's predictable? Like every single time it says something that the Israelites says, it does wordplay to show that they were twisting the text. No, it doesn't. It does that once. This is not a miracle by any means. A cumulative case is a legitimate argument, but they don't have a cumulative case. They just have a couple of random examples. All right, Mary, your thoughts?
Just since Hebrew is similar in the fact that you have uh, that you don't write your vowels except for the few alepphs here and there in the way that you normally write. This is the longest palindrome in Hebrew, and it is this entire thing. He is
Holy
a
cow.
poet, and this is the longest palindrome that there is in Hebrew. It's pretty flippin' long. It's a bit, so apparently he can do palindromes much better than Allah can. So let me go translate to
Yeah,
English.
so
Some of it's
I would,
repetitive,
right, we're
but
not arguing that only God could have done this. But on the surface, if you're just looking at this, I don't know, 500, 1,000 letters, something like that, 9,779 letters, 2,662 words. You try to repeat that at home. I bet you won't be able to, but does that prove that it's from God? No, it doesn't. It just proves that a very skilled author did it.
yep,
And we don't have that in the Quran, right? We don't have something that would have required a very skilled author. We
no.
only have things that would require average intelligence.
So here is my final page here. Um, so it is he who created the night and the day, the sun and the moon, each swimming in a sky. So the sun swims around the earth here. So keep this in mind. The sun and the moon are both swimming around the earth in an individual sky, a falak, It's an individual area of the sky, an individual region. It's like a world of itself or a half sphere. So in terms of whenever you talk about the old Aristotelian idea of spheres in which there are planets, that's the Arabic equivalent of that. It's not an orbit in the way that we understand orbits. And why on earth is the sun in an orbit anyway, if you're arguing for that? Now, here's the question. Would a palindrome reveal the secrets of celestial movement according to the Quranic view? Or would it do it an accurate view? So the Quranic view is that they are, in fact, swimming. And both the sun and the moon are swimming in these spaces. It's not
And
that
they're
they're
both revolving
circling
the Earth.
around an orbit. There is no like orbit here. They're in a space, they're in a sky, they're in a location. It's not about circling. Orbit implies that they are circling. Rather, this is saying that they're on a shell, that they're on different shell plane levels, is what it's saying. And yet they're going to, oh, it's a palindrome. So it goes around and around. Actually, no, palindromes go back and forth. They don't go around and around. Do they go back and forth? Is that what's happening? Does the sun go east,
That's a
west,
good
west,
point.
east, east, west, west, east, east, west? They're not going around and round in a palindrome. It goes back and forth. But if you insist on reading it somehow as being around and around, that's not what this is saying in Arabic, is not around and around, rather that they travel in different zones from one another, these different shells. Each one is constrained to their own shell level. And again, the appeal to palindrome, a man, a plan, a canal, Panama is far cleverer than this as a palindrome, in terms of its cleverness. So I just don't, and that's not from God. Neither was that really long poem. It's not from God. So why are you arguing that this means that it's from God? So
Yeah,
now
and
they'll realize,
I guarantee that really long poem in Hebrew was way, way harder. I bet you the author probably spent weeks composing that and doing
yeah,
nothing else.
yeah.
That was way, 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 way harder than anything we find in the Quran, and literally no one would claim that that's divine. So why in the world is this an argument for the Quran? And good old Mulhid here says Quran is written left to right, hence Quran must be true. I concur.
There we go. Yep. That's about the level of these arguments. All right. So now they're going to go, we realize that we have made a terrible argument, but there are all these other arguments that we did not, in fact, make that you can't address.
Yeah, well, right. So
That's
they're
the
going to say,
conclusion.
well, they called the video Hebrew word that proved the Quran is from Allah, but okay, I'll give them credit. They didn't really believe that. They were just picking a sensational title to get people to watch. Fine, fair. I agree. The cumulative case is an acceptable argument, but so far you have nothing, or almost nothing. You have something of a person of average intelligence could do. You've ruled out the fact that it was done by a machine pushing random characters out. You've ruled out the fact that it was done by someone of exceptionally low intelligence. You haven't nearly gotten us anywhere close to divine only, even though you said that in the video. This could have only come from divine knowledge. There's no other explanation whatsoever. I don't know why the first time I added the video doesn't show up, but whatever. Let's get their concluding comments here.
Yep, where
Which
they
they
admit that they
complain
made a
about
terrible point.
moving the goalpost. The Quran is miraculous because it contains layers upon layers upon layers of miracles of all kinds and
Scientific
types. There are
debunked.
so many angles and aspects to it, which are all elegantly.
All
Yeah,
right, so
pause that.
let's look at all these things. So rhetorical, I guess that's what today was supposed to be. I guess he
Which
gave his
isn't
best
particularly good.
examples.
It is not. It is not an excellent example of rhetoric in most of its sections.
Right.
The
I mean,
parts
he
that are
admitted that
poetic.
other Arabic poets have done better. Basically,
Well,
he
here's
admitted
the big thing. The parts that are the most elegant are the parts that people have the most arguments about what the heck they mean. Nobody knows what they mean.
that.
And there are
Awesome.
arguments about the meaning of all kinds of words and like what they actually mean. So whenever Allah speaks in a high tenor and excellently, relatively speaking, he speaks opaquely and people can't understand him. When he speaks clearly, then he just writes paragraphs of droning on and on with instructions. He cannot manage to be both poetic and clear, which means that
You can only
his
do one or the
production
other.
is a rhetorical disaster.
That's awesome, right? So
So
like
judge
sometimes he
me.
can compose pretty good
Yeah,
poetry, but then he loses the meaning, right?
right.
Like pretty good sounding poetry. It would actually be pretty good because pretty good poetry should also convey meaning, but pretty good sounding poetry.
But
Other times
remember
he
when we were
conveys
talking
clear
about
meaning, but he can't
people,
do both simultaneously.
right? People don't know whether or not certain things are archers or lions. They don't know whether or not certain things are stars or cows sweeping their heads low. Like that level of uncertainty. They have no idea that there's that level of disagreement that you don't know whether or not a certain verse is talking about cows or stars. That's a pretty significant problem there.
And the next
So,
one here is prophecies. I only know two things that people even ever try to claim are prophecies in the Quran, which two things is not very impressive to begin with. One is an ambiguous uh, ex eventual, after the fact prophecy, and the other is a warlord declaring he's going to be victorious, just like every single warlord ever in the world history, and some of which were victorious. Any
and there are
thoughts
many
from you, Mary?
prophecies,
I mean, we've debunked these things in
yeah,
detail elsewhere, but
and there are
any
many
thoughts?
prophecies that are just clearly fake and untrue. So, like, there are ridiculous prophecies that never happen. Let's talk about historical. The Quran gets
Well, no,
basically
we got them in
written
order.
in order.
Scientific, right? So scientific. We'll just let Ali Dawa do that one.
The scientific argument, the scientific miracles in the Quran, is debunked.
All right, let's move on to the next one. Metaphysical. I have no idea what that's supposed to mean. Do you know what they think is a metaphysical miracle? I mean, how would you even test
Oh,
something
that
metaphysical?
Allah could not become a man, but he has hands and feet and a shin and eyes. But because he can't become a man and it attacks the Bible, that makes it a miracle. So the Quran
Okay.
has the dumbest metaphysics of any serious work of religion that attempts to be like contemplative at all that I have ever read by far, and yet Muslims think it's special. That's why Muqatil is not read anymore because the earliest Muslims, they were all anthropomorphists because Muhammad was an anthropomorphist. But you can't admit that because it's so embarrassing. So we're going to throw out the metaphysics of Muhammad and make up our own and pretend that's what Muhammad taught.
All right. So then metaphysical, I don't even know how you would test that, but obviously not a miracle. Historical, again, I only know of a couple of claims people ever make. The main one being that the Pharaoh at the time of Joseph was called king instead of Pharaoh, and that's arguably, possibly, maybe the title that was predominantly used in Egypt, even though both terms mean king ultimately. And it's perfectly acceptable for Egyptologists of today to refer to early pharaohs as pharaohs, even though they were referred to as kings contemporarily. Total nonsense, not an argument whatsoever. And then anything else I've heard is like not even worth addressing. Anything you want to? You're about to
Well,
say something on it though.
yeah, the big thing about the historical is that Muhammad didn't know that Jesus was on earth 600 years previously. He just didn't know that.
True,
He
and he doesn't
know
know who Mary
he
is.
doesn't know when Moses was. He doesn't know when anyone was. He doesn't know where any of these places were. He mixes up. He thinks that things that happened just 300 years ago were more ancient than things that happened 2,000 years before him. So he
Right.
literally gets things thousands of years off
Oh, that he knows history well. And by the way, that
regularly.
Joseph example, the only way you can even make that argument is to take the biblical timeline because there is no timeline in the Quran. So you have to assume the biblical timeline is right in order to make an argument that the Quran is right. Okay, then, whatever you say.
Well, there
And
are
then,
references to a number of other places that aren't even in the Bible because they did not particularly exist while the Bible was written. And
yep,
those places that were, later came to destruction, but they came to destruction like 300 AD, 250 AD, maybe as late as 500 AD, and Muhammad thinks they're super, super ancient. So there's stuff well outside of the Bible that he gets the historicity wrong that are he goes, oh well, the Quran has better historicity. No, it doesn't match anything. Doesn't match any source.
Indeed, it would be, let's put it this way: it would be impossible to even create a timeline based on the information found in the Quran alone. You'd have to go to other Islamic tradition to even create a timeline, let alone demonstrate it's an accurate timeline. So if you can't even create a timeline, other than these things happened in the past, how in the world is that supposed to be a miracle? I don't know, but allegedly it exists. So the next one's legislative. Is there any law in the Quran that didn't exist in some pre-Islamic society, Mary?
No, that is
Then how
original
in the
to the
world is this a
Quran.
legislative miracle?
It either steals from the Jews or it steals from existing pagan Arab society.
Nor do I even know how it
Well,
could
I mean, there
possibly.
are lots of rules about farting and things like that that didn't exist outside of that. So
Well, no, those are going
there
to come from Hadith. They're not going to come from the
yeah, but
Quran.
that all
We're just
comes
talking
from a
about the
hadith.
Quran.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Quran.
I mean, it doesn't
There
actually have
is
that
the
much
whole
legislation.
you can boink the cancellation of adoption, so you can
Yeah,
boink your
that's
daughter.
the
That is
legislative
unique.
miracle.
That is unique to Islam. Divorcing prepubescent girls is also unique to the Quran. I don't know of any other society that was anywhere near the Arabs who had these things because they weren't having sex with minors, and uh, they were not they either did not care about bonds of marriage, so you could marry your father, your own stepmother after your father died, you could marry her, or you could marry your son's wife after she was divorced without a problem in the pagan systems, or it was absolutely forbidden in Christianity and Judaism. So,
And so just to clarify, I didn't mean that the term pharaoh linguistically literally means king. There's a different Egyptian word for king, but it's used as a title for the king.
same way we talk
It's
about the
used
White
as
House did
reference
this.
to the king.
Yeah. If we say the White House issued a statement, that's the same thing as saying that the president issued the statement. It was issued with the president's authority, exactly the same. So Pharaoh and White House are used in the same way and have come to be used one for another. It's called metonymy. So,
And actually, he made the exact same point.
oh, there you go. Ah,
Yeah, he was just clarifying my
that's funny.
point, right?
Yep.
I wasn't speaking very precisely, and I thank you for correcting me. I didn't think it linguistically meant king, just to be clear. But even theoretically, I don't even know how theoretically something could be a legislative miracle.
Yeah.
How in the world is there a law that couldn't be derived by a human being? Like this is just nonsensical from the surface. Like scientific, I get that you could have knowledge of nature
Well, they run
that
to the
didn't
completeness
exist at the
of
time.
the Sunnah, but there is no legislative completeness in the Quran. You need all the Sunnah, and then you have to have the reasoning from the Sunnah.
Right.
Really has
And,
to be a part
and
of it
and a
too.
complete system, the United States has a complete system of laws. Is
Yeah.
that a miracle? I mean, it's just stupid on the
Well,
surface.
the United States doesn't tell you whether or not you should enter the toilet with one foot or the other, so the toilet jinn are going to get you.
Okay, but Islam doesn't tell you whether or not you're allowed to use the internet. I mean,
Well, you're not. Like literally, there are groups of Muslims who say that anything that didn't exist at the time of Muhammad is forbidden, and they would be correct in terms of what is actually allowed. So any technology that Muhammad did not have, you should not have. You should be practicing only prophetic medicine. So anything that Muhammad did not have you do for medicine, you should not be doing as a Muslim. Sorry. He gave you the perfect pattern. He did not use vaccines. He did not have advanced surgery. He had cauterization and some other primitive things. You need to only take the spices, the medicinal spices and herbs that he recommended, and medicinal foods. That should be your only medicine if you are a Muslim following in the perfect pattern. Otherwise, his pattern is not perfect. He is deficient in giving you an indication for how everyone is to live from then on. And
yeah,
yeah,
I
there
guess
were people
actually
who were attacking.
that's a good point, Mary. Actually, that is how you could have a legislative miracle. You could legislate for something that did not yet exist. Like there could be legislation for a moving picture box, i.e. a TV, in the Quran, but there isn't. So
That's
that's
true.
actually how you could have a legislated miracle. You could predict, it could be a prediction of some future invention and how you could get the rules around it. But that doesn't exist, sadly. Sadly, it does not exist. I did want to bring this up real quick from Scarface. Is Book of Daniel a miracle written 500 years after Daniel? Mashallah. So notice he can't actually address anything in the video. He can't address anything that we have to say. But he says, according to some critical scholars who make the assumption that it's impossible to write a legitimate prophecy, Daniel must have been written after all the prophecies contained in it. Therefore, we know that Daniel was written at this particular time. Even if you accept that date, that has nothing to do with whether the Quran is miraculous or not. Congratulations. You've proven that you have nothing to support your own religion other than making atheist secular assumptions that prophecy is impossible.
Yep. All right. So tajweed. So the
So,
way
yeah, so
in which the
tajweed is
Quran
pronunciation, right?
is chanted.
Yeah, that's what I thought it meant. So how is that a freaking miracle? How in the world is rules around pronunciation or chanting or however you want to put it a miracle? Oh my goodness.
Because
What
it's
is
in the
this
poetry.
nonsense?
So remember how I brought out the Arabic poetry and how it's chanted in a rhythmic way, and I showed how tajweed apes, literally apes, Jewish and Christian chanting with its own little Arab flourishes. That it's imitating something else. So it's supposed to be miraculous that tajweed doesn't sound like poetry recitation, but it's just
Except it
aping
does.
something that already existed from other people. How does that prove that it's divine? So,
I mean, literally
anyway,
anyone could do that with any text. I'm just putting the first comment, right? Muslims pray to a cobblestone rock. You get the point, right? You can do it. You can pronounce, you can recite any text in any fashion whatsoever. So how is there
yeah,
being a set of best practices for reciting the Quran a miracle? I don't get it.
it,
I don't even get what the
well,
argument's supposed to be.
but it sounds so pretty.
Yeah, that's the skill of the human being reciting the text, not inherent to the text, right?
Yeah,
If they were so inclined, the skilled reciter, which by the way, the guy who did this video sounded horrific, way more horrific than they typically do. But go to one that actually sounds good, or at least decent. I guarantee that that same reciter could make any text sound the way he makes the Quran sound.
yep.
It's entirely in the skill of the person doing it, which actually, I mean, this video itself made apparent because the guy's voice sounded terrible when he was reciting the Quran. When he was speaking normally, he had a pretty nice speaking voice. When he tried to recite the Quran according to the miracle of Tajweed, he sounded horrific. Like when he was pronouncing Arabic words in his normal tone of voice, they sounded pretty good. When he tried to recite the Arabic words in the miraculous way, they sounded terrible. I don't get it. All right, let me just play the last few seconds.
Embedded into the text, and all of this exists at the same time in the same text while providing accurate, scientifically correct, uncontradicting, and just simply linguistically marvelous text. But
Oh
for
my God.
us,
All right, I was going to let it play to the end. It's not accurate, it's not correct, and it contains contradictions.
Not only that, it's not even grammatical. ran into a place where Muhammad was called guardians plural yesterday.
Right.
We are guardians. Muhammad or Allah
And
says.
my
Excuse me.
audience,
Allah says.
right.
Allah says we are guardians.
The audience will know this, but I'm going to say it anyway because most Muslims don't know it. The reason the Quran, there's such a hesitation to translate the Quran into other languages and why they consider non-Arabic versions of the Quran to be interpretations and not translations is because it's extremely hard to translate the text because it doesn't make any sense in Arabic. Like you have to guess at what the intended meaning was, which means different people will guess different things. And this is supposed to be some kind of miracle that it cobbles a bunch of words together. Now, granted, this is a feature that poetry has sometimes, where it cobbles words together in ways that aren't technically grammatical. But the point being, that's not a miracle, right? It's not especially easy to understand. It's especially difficult to understand. And it does this to try to force some sort of meter or rhyme or whatever. And it does that poorly. It does everything poorly. Everything it does poorly. Absolutely, a human being could have come up with this text. Or more than one human beings. That's a possibility too. It could be the work of multiple people. Let's finish it out for
It
real
is
this time.
not a mystery how something can be so perfect, because
It's
it
definitely
is
not
the
a
word
mystery.
of Allah. Thanks for watching. If you want to start learning,
All right, I don't need to have him say to subscribe to the channel to learn Arabic or whatever the heck he was going to say. So we don't need that part. He said, thanks for watching. I'm stopping the video there. It is readily apparent. It's not a mystery how this text could have come to be. A human being who heard oral stories, repeated some of those oral stories poorly, tried to make it sound really good, failed to attract any followers when he did, according to Islamic history, not according to me, when he was just going around saying, everyone, you should follow me. I'm a prophet because my text is so miraculous. My poetry is far superior to yours. Blah, 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 blah. He attracted a dozen followers. Then he changed the message to, hey, come follow me and we will loot unrobbed caravans. And then when that was successful and he got a larger one, it became, hey, come follow me and we'll loot villages. And if you die while we're looting them, you will get 72 virgins in paradise at minimum. And if you are successful, then you get to keep all the stuff we steal. Not a mystery. Not a mystery how this text came about or how it came to be accepted. It has nothing to do with the contents of the book and everything to do with the success of Muhammad as a warlord. End of story. Mary, your end of story?
That's basically it. It's not good history. It's not good legislation. It's not good anything. The Quran is cobbled together from stories that Muhammad heard. He repeats the ones he knows multiple times. He leaves out huge amounts because he just hadn't heard them. When he repeats them with different details, some of which are not compatible with each other. You can have two different versions of a story which are compatible, but sometimes they're not compatible with each other at all. You have issues with historicity being completely off by hundreds and thousands of years. You have issues with his complete lack of comprehension of what the rest of the world is. He thinks he's the only people who are still pagans left in the world are the people around him. He thinks everybody else has come to worship the only God who was originally Al-Rab, but then later Muhammad decides he's also Allah. So it's a ridiculous book, and it's so busy telling people not to bother Muhammad when he's eating, by lingering in his house after dinner, that it
Oh,
doesn't bother to tell people
yeah,
how
not
to
a
pray
legislative
or
miracle.
live or all kinds of other important things that has to be left to the Sunnah because there just was enough room because you had to have the repetitions of the stories and then things that only applied for Muhammad's life that now you memorize forever, even though they are no longer useful for anyone. So it is one of the most obvious fake. It's more obvious as a fake book than the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is far better done as a fake
Which is
prophet book.
sad because
It's pretty bad.
it shows literal word for word borrowing from the King James Bible at places. That's how
Yeah.
obvious of a fraud is, and it's still better than the Quran. Oh my goodness. So we'll open it up in case there's any Muslims who want to come and talk to us and respond to this video live, not just any random thing that you want to talk about or how you think that the book of Daniel is not a miracle. Well, great. You don't have to think the book of Daniel is a miracle. But and then he went on to explain why secular scholars say that. And yes, I'm well aware of the arguments for the late dating of Daniel. It has absolutely nothing to do with the topic today. If you want to have a stream on whether Daniel should be dated early or late, we can have that discussion, but it has nothing to do with whether the Quran is a linguistic miracle or not. Did have a good comment here, which I apparently did not bookmark, so give me one second to pull it back up. Elizabeth says, an interesting discovery was made by my friend ICA, but I'm not saying he didn't discover it, but he's far from the first person to notice this. Over at Midnight Watcher regarding the Hebrew word for curse, it's pronounced Allah, same as Allah, God, in Arabic. And in fairness, that's a coincidence. It's
Oh,
not.
yeah, it would be, but somebody else figured out what word she meant. It's one that means an oath or to swear, not to curse. So
Yeah.
it's
I
they're
mean,
not
yeah,
the
yeah,
same.
my point being
Now
is it's true.
arar, which can be in the form ara, not Allah. And so I was totally confused, but somebody else found the actual one. But
Yeah,
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 it would be a
that's not the
coincidence
point.
anyway. But
Right. The point is that, and I don't know why it put the Hebrew as as uh, Latin characters. It's not in the chat, but when I pull down on the screen, it shows that way. Anyway, irrelevant, right? Oh, I see what happened. It put it at the end because it's left to right, or right to left. I mean, anyway, so it looks weird on your screen because it automatically put it left to right or right to left. Anyway, point being that this is true. It's a coincidence. But if we're going to argue for miracles here, right? It's a miracle that God, the real God, takes the Hebrew word and makes it be the word that's adopted as the primary word for God in a culture which will then have the number one false prophet in world history arise from it. It's actually forward looking, right? I'm not making this argument for real. I'm saying if you want to make the kind of stupid arguments this video makes, this would be a better argument than the kind of arguments they make, that the true God who knew everything knew that the false prophet Muhammad would arise and put this subtle thing in the Hebrew language whereby the Hebrew word for curse sounds like the Arabic word for God to indicate that anyone who follows the Arabic God is following a curse. Not an argument I'm making, but a better argument than the ones this video makes. I don't think we're going to have a Muslim response. Our Muslim friends either left immediately or interacted
yep,
with us for a bit, but then left. Such a shame for that. Nobody understands a miracle, hence Quran is a miracle. Well, good argument, right? No one can understand the Quran. And sadly, this is obviously a joke, but sadly, that is actually an argument that Muslims sometimes make, is that the fact parts of the Quran can't be understood proves that only God knows the answer and it must come from him. It couldn't be that a human being just put nonsense gibberish in his text.
yep, yep.
I mean, that's not a joke. That is actually an argument I've heard Muslims make, for real.
Yes, the nonsense words, and it's because there's nonsense in there that nobody knows what it means. It must be from Allah, even though it claims that it's a clear book. Even though it says it's a clear book, the fact that that's a lie, that it's an unclear book, it proves it's from God. I've read lots of nonsensical things that are very unclear, and I never went, goodness, this makes no sense at all. It must be from God. All right.
All
I
right, so
actually
we'll
have to
wrap up
skedaddle.
here. Yep,
Yep.
Mary is out of town. I don't know if she wants to reveal why, so I won't say. But Mary is out of town. That's why she didn't have time to put on makeup. She has things to do, so we'll call it a night here. What are we doing next week, Mary?
Probably another fluff piece because I'm out of town till till Monday.
All right, we'll do another reaction video. In other words, fluff
Yep.
piece. We'll do another reaction video. I'll find another ridiculous
Well, they're
video that
fun.
you.
They're fun, fluffy, silly
No, I
little
mean,
one-offs.
no, they're good. This is good
Yeah.
content, Mary. Don't call it fluff. It's good content.
It's popcorn content, but it's good. It's fun popcorn.
Yeah, and I mean, in all seriousness, right? This video has 350,000 views.
Yep.
This is an argument that Muslims will adapt. It's not an argument that I've heard historically, other than the orbit thing for the palindrome. I had heard that before, but I've not heard this argument before. It was innovative by the author of Arabic 101, not God, but it was innovative. So over time, I bet you're going to see Muslims start to use these arguments. So it's good to be able to respond to them. You know, good to be able to say, wait a second, let's follow your own logic to its conclusion. Are you saying that Usain Bolt is specially gifted by God to be a fast sprinter because his name is Bolt, and this is proof that you should believe he's a prophet? Because that's
Yeah.
kind of the argument they made. I mean, that was their own example. I don't know why in the world they put those examples in at the beginning. I think that undermined their whole point from the very beginning,
Because
because
they
it
wanted to
shows.
use a fancy word to establish that they're smarter than you and they know something that you don't, and so you're going to be impressed by them after this. It's a trick. If I tell people about some factoid that they don't know to make them feel like I'm a smart person just to do that, that's a manipulation tactic. So,
Karen's on the rewatch crew. I encourage anyone who wasn't here at the start to go back and watch it. I think that this was actually a really good video to look at. Um, this wasn't nearly as painful as some of the other Dawa videos we've looked
no.
at. They actually did well. They did well at
They did well at
hiding
actually
some things.
making a point even though they were terrible
Right.
points.
Right. They actually made their points, which should be the bare minimum, but actually a lot of these videos don't even make any points. They just say words, which is so painful because then I have to try to make an argument for them to respond to. But
Yeah,
this
I only
one,
had to fix one where they translated Zechariah's name in a particularly stupid way.
anyway, I think that this is a good one to be aware of. I think that Muslims probably will start using some of these type arguments over time. The scientific argument is gone. The moral life of Muhammad, they can't even remotely approach. All they can say is, we don't believe in your corrupted Western values or something along those lines. They have to defend the linguistic miracle of the Quran, and this is a good novel attempt at doing so. Failed pretty badly, but was good by Islamic standards. So there you go. All right. Mary and I will be back next week. I plan to have my Bible study this Friday and do some other reaction stream probably over the weekend. I'm trying to convince my wife to join me on one of these things. So maybe I'll get her on here and we can both react to a silly video. No promises, right? No promises on her, but I will definitely try to stream whether or not she wants to join me. Until we meet again, God bless everyone. Have an amazing rest of your day, and I need to close out with some words of prayer from our good friend, Pastor Jake.
Pray this ceaselessly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me.